Ultra scoffed and sighed at how long Mars was taking just to learn one skill, but he didn't seem to understand all the work that the dark-haired man would have to do just to learn a skill. Mars was sitting down on the ground, breathing heavily while surrounded by hundreds of books and papers as he was trying to focus. He heard the voices of Gordon and Ultra, humming in thought as he wondered why they were standing outside the door. This man was the skill lender, Mars, who is part of the S-rank party known as the Sword of Divine Silver. Two women named Elia and Tina walked down the hallway and asked if there was something wrong, surprising Mars even more as more people started to crowd around the door of the room that Mars was in. These five were in a party. Ultra was a swordsman who held countless skills, such as the slash attack enchantment and Hawk's Eyes, and focused on the Godspeed sword technique of the Sword Saint. Elia was a princess of sorcery, holding a knowledge skill that allowed a person to possess ancient magic, and she had a high-speed chanting and mana self-recovery to make it possible to use her skill in battle. Gordon, a former gatekeeper of the Capital Palace, used a hardening skill called Obsidian, to guard like a fortress with physical enchantment and instant footwork to have high mobility. Tina was the Healing Saint, using her Wings of the Angel healing skill to make it even possible for her to raise the dead. With such strong and unique skills, the four of them showed synergy inside the S-rank party. Mars, however, felt as though he was just mediocre since he only had one skill, Skill Lender. He did have another skill, but there was nothing left because he would lend it all to his party members with the Skill Lender skill. Knowledge and training was needed to learn a skill, which was why he had a study room to himself, except it had been starting to change into a storeroom for some reason. Everyone outside of the room was gossiping about Mars, saying how it was just a waste, even if they borrowed the skills from Mars, since Elia held enough skills, and also saying how there was a gap in talent between them. They thought that it would be better if Mars wasn't in the party and believed that Mars may not be useful to them or needed anymore. The dark-haired boy covered his ears while sitting on his knees, his body shaking in frustration from hearing the whispers of insults. Mars took a breath and felt as though it was time for him to truly leave. 3 years ago, his fate was branched off, when the party had recklessly challenged a high-rank dungeon without preparation, and barely won with luck to capture it. Ultra and the others were convinced that they did it with their own strength, refusing to listen to anything that Mars said after that moment. It was the truth that there was a gap in talent, and Mars knew that it was likely that he would be asked to leave the party after their next labyrinth. He finally walked out of the room and said that he was done and was going to lend the skills to the four. However, they all looked at Mars with a glare for how long it took him. The dark-haired boy looked down with a frown before proceeding to lend everyone the 12 skills that he had learned. Activating his skill as a bright light enveloped the hallway and lists of information appeared and started to enter the other members of the party. After it was finished, everyone skimmed over the new skills they gained and already mentioned that it was time for them to go to the dungeon, disappointing Mars as he walked off with an upset expression from the fact that none of them even thanked him. Mars walked to the dining hall when he realized that he had forgotten to eat, while he was working hard to learn the skills. But when he received the food, it was already prepared by his team. He opened the bowl, only to find it filled with just water and a molding piece of bread from a few days ago. Ultra laughed at the sight and lied to the boy, saying that they were trying to save credit at the moment, but Mars knew the truth about how the rest of the group was likely eating meat without him. The next day came and the group set off for the S-rank dungeon, the Devil's Abyss. Ultra said that he was going to use the Sword Saint skill and told everyone else to not get caught in it, ordering Mars to get on the ground and not move. Elia laughed and told the boy that she expected him to not get in the way and demanded him to not be a burden. The long-haired swordsman activated his skill and swiftly slashed through all of the small monsters. Mars watched the scene with a sigh, knowing that the Sword Saint skill wasn't the only skill that Ultra was using to help him. Learning a skill was just like a water wheel, where the more water meant the more the wheel would turn, and how skills were the same, and would become stronger with each use. Different from that common skill, unique skills rarely appear at 8 to 12 years old, and had different effects and characteristics that no other skills had. Mars' skill lender was one of the unique skills, and even if he learned the skill, other people were the only ones who can activate it properly. With the slashing enchantment he learned, if Mars swung a sword, the power would be minimal, but if he lent it to a person like Ultra, the effect would increase tenfold. Work hard to learn many skills so I can contribute, was what Mars thought, causing him to desperately learn until he was invited to the Sword of Divine Silver because of his skill. Ultra walked up to Mars and stomped on his head, telling him that he got all the baggage dirty and yelled at the boy before walking off in anger. They continued deeper into the dungeon, and Ultra wondered out loud if they were truly in the S-rank dungeon they've heard about, and Elia agreed, saying that the trap didn't even affect them. Mars walked close behind the group, glaring at their backs as he knew that the floor they were on was full of poison that could paralyze a person enough to affect even the strongest. Because of enough people sacrificing themselves, people had acquired knowledge for a countering skill, which Mars had learned, and lent to the others, which none of them knew about. It wouldn't even matter, as no one would listen to him if he explained it to them, and arguing would just be a waste of time. The more important thing was that he would continue keeping his distance, and while the others would joke about him being too scared, Mars would know that the effect on the others would disappear if they were too far from him. If Mars were to move 3 more steps away, the 2 laughing in front of him would faint because of the gas. But he knew that it would mean nothing to him, and he held back his feelings. Everyone stumbled upon a branch in their path, and Ultra yelled at Mars for a skill to help them, to which the dark-haired boy explained that there was the Scout's intuition skill. But the swordsman continued to yell about when a skill like that was given. He wanted the boy to explain every skill to him, or else he would cut his share of the money even more. But Mars knew that Ultra would not even listen in the end. However, the boy stayed meek and continued apologizing. Mars thought that he should pray that Ultra's mood got better when they got back to the surface. And the swordsman proceeded to use the skill mentioned. A large amount of energy could be felt through one of the doorways, catching Ultra's attention as Elia asked what he was seeing. He explained to her that the door on the right was the correct path to go on, but admitted that he knew that they were about to encounter a big enemy. Everyone finally stumbled upon a large door that held the symbol of a dragon, and Mars stared at it with both fear and anticipation. Such an imposing symbol meant that this was definitely the boss room, and Mars knew that the life of many people who died here was not for nothing, after using the knowledge that their predecessors left behind. But no one else in the group felt or thought that way at all, as all they cared about was themselves, and how they were at the boss room. Suddenly, Mars was brought out of his thoughts by Ultra, who said that he was going to explain the plan to the boy. Mars was confused, as his only job this entire time was to crawl in a corner and do nothing. But Ultra explained that he wanted Mars to have the honor of being the vanguard, which brought a shiver of fear down his spine. Being the vanguard meant that he would have to jump into the boss room all alone, which usually meant death with how unpredictable dungeons can be, and how weak Mars knew he was. He turned around and looked at the others with confusion, asking what the point of that was, until Mars realized that Ultra was trying to avoid paying Mars the severance pay a person got when retiring from the party, and how it would significantly increase with each year. Mars was in the start of his 7th year, and Ultra knew that the reward would have been big for Mars, because of how dangerous the adventuring business was. But Mars was at his breaking point, and wouldn't allow this anymore. He turned toward Tina, Gordon, and Elia and asked if they agreed, but all agreed without hesitation. Mars stood there in shock at how easily everyone was throwing away the 6 years they've spent together with him, how everything he had done seemed to mean nothing. Ultra explained that keeping someone untalented was a debt, and having him was a loss for them, telling Mars that everyone in the group decided that the party would be reborn as a true S-rank after this dungeon. Mars looked at the ground with a darkness over his face, remembering how he thought that he should be supporting an S-rank party for the world and for his happiness, but none of that was true from the beginning. The dark-haired boy was about to listen to the words from Ultra, until he gave one last request, looking up at everyone and demanding them that they give back all the skills they had borrowed. Everyone was confused until Mars explained that they were going to lose effect when he died, so he would like to be able to hurt the boss even a little if it really was his time to die. Ultra laughed before agreeing, asking what was needed to do to return the skills. Mars activated his skill and said that they just needed to say that they were returning their skills, and within seconds, the dark-haired boy felt the repayment process approving, hearing the voices of young women in his mind. The party asked if it was done, and Mars confirmed, before asking if they remember the interest rate of a skill called Toichi, and how it was 10% of high interest every 10 days. Elia walked up and said that she remembered, saying it was not a problem as it would not prove to be a difference due to their large amounts of SP. She said that there likely could be a skill that is lost, but believed that it was a skill that she rarely used anymore. Gordon and Tina continued, and said that they had already considered the loss of the skills borrowed, and didn't see anything wrong with what would happen, but Mars knew that everyone had a big miscalculation. He finally spoke and told Elia that the calculation of his skill interest rate was compound and not simple, and this information only confused everyone as the girl was left in thought. He explained that the base SP stayed the same, and only added 10% on the original number every 10 days, while exponentially totaling up throughout the years. Ultra misunderstood the explanation and still didn't believe that there was a problem, proceeding to forcefully take the baggage that Mars had so the boy could fight the boss already. During that, Elia was recalculating everything and her eyes widened in shock and horror, as she realized what the true number was after all this time. Mars watched the girl make her realization and smirked evilly, knowing that this was expected from the genius sorcerer. Suddenly, Ultra kicked Mars through the door of the boss room, and as the door started to close, Elia ran at him with a cry. But it was too late. The doors closed and the processing completed, starting to collect all of the interest from the past 6 years. As Mars felt the collection of all the interest, a sharp, agonizing pain coursed through his body. He fell to the floor, clutching his gut and head as blood spilled out of his mouth, feeling his consciousness going somewhere else as a secret safety mechanism activated itself. Mars found himself to be standing in the middle of a white void without any clothes, yet he didn't feel cold despite that fact. He started to walk around, seeing how he was all alone in the space, but he didn't feel uneasy. A voice rang out and said that the relocation to the protected area was confirmed, confusing him as he wondered where he had gotten teleported. The voice responded and explained that the place was a space inside of his mind, explaining that he was there because his brain was damaged due to the massive amount of skill collected. Mars was surprised to know that he could have a conversation with the voice of his skill, and the voice said that its personality was already configured despite the lack of a body. He heard these words and asked who configured it, but the voice did not answer the question, and instead said that the repayment process was almost finished, and that Mars would wake up soon. The voice said that it had been watching the boy closer than anyone else, and prayed that, from now on, Mars would reach his future and shine brightly. Mars thought that there was no one who noticed his efforts, even when he was desperately thinking for others. But there was a person watching, someone who was there from the beginning. Mars's brain had finished healing, meaning that he would wake up soon with all of his new skills, but just before he left, he asked for the name of the voice. This time he actually got an answer: Yue. Meanwhile, Elia was trying to beg Ultra to go into the boss room at that moment and kill Mars as soon as possible. He stared down at the girl with confusion, thinking that what she was saying was weird since Mars was supposedly going to die soon anyway. He finally spoke with a smirk, saying that he knew that she was a genius, but said that they had something called common sense. However, Elia's body started to get weak as her breathing got heavy. She collapsed to the floor while sweating profusely and coughing as she choked out the words about how the poison was starting to affect her. Everyone else stared with shock until they started to feel the effects of the poison as well, all falling to the floor while clutching their bodies. Tina was confused to know that there was poison in the first place, and Ultra realized that the Wings of the Angel skill wasn't working, and within seconds, they all fell to the floor unconscious. During this, Mars slowly woke up and realized that the boss had not attacked him during that time. He thought that it had been a while, but it was really only an instant, and he looked around and saw how dark the room was. Mars decided to take time to look through all the skills he had acquired and activated his God's Eye and Scout's Intuition in order to understand the situation. Something sat on the throne, and that something was the snake dragon Vritra. If Mars didn't defeat it, the dungeon would not be captured, and he knew that he could start making lots of money with the skills he had at that moment. He remembered information from long ago that Vritra was a white dragon that couldn't be killed with any technique or weapon, but his thoughts were interrupted by the large snake lunging at him, which he swiftly dodged. It thrashed its body at him, but he stopped it from connecting the hit with another skill and sent it flying into a wall. If it were a normal monster, it would have already been dead, but this was not a normal monster. Yue's voice came back once more and asked if he wanted to proceed to the next step, to which he promptly agreed and chose to seize Elia's skill, the Wisdom of the Ancient. Mars held up his hand as a light enveloped his body as he activated the Songs of the Gods skill, learning the Cocytus skill that was amplified by many other skills as it charged up. Someone in Mars's past had said that skills were about playing with the synergy, and with that thought, Mars shot the attack and blew Vritra to pieces. However, it was not truly dead and tried to regenerate its body by coming back together. But Mars wouldn't let that happen and went to freeze every piece to seal the monster's regeneration ability. He used his spatial jump ability to enhance his skill range, being able to picture the world and the place beyond it, before he sent the pieces of Vritra's body to the unlimited darkness known as the Sea of the Stars. The dungeon started to collapse, meaning that the dungeon had been captured. Mars noticed that Ultra and the others were all still paralyzed by the poison, but he believed that the mining group should be able to help them before the dungeon completely collapses. Just before Mars left after getting the boss materials, he noticed there was still something inside the boss room: Vritra's egg. He picked it up and considered destroying it, until he believed that the only thing that could stop Vritra was another Vritra, deciding to raise the monster when it would hatch. He asked Yue if it objected, but the voice didn't and respected his choice and said it was interesting. Mars grinned as that was the first time to have been told that, proceeding to use his spatial jump to escape the dungeon. On that day, for the first time, he was the first one in the party who got out under the blue sky. And after that, Mars was able to treat himself to a warm soup without being yelled at by anyone. Mars placed the egg of Ritra, the item he had found and taken from the previous dungeon, into a large bag, and put his hands on his hips while staring at the town that he had known for so long. The wind breezed through the air, and the dark-haired boy knew that it was time for him to leave, and start his new journey somewhere else. Ultra and the others were still underground, but Mars finished the guild withdrawal process and he had gotten his severance pay, and a bounty before moving out of the inn. He called out to Yue and told her that he wanted to create a body for her. Yue responded and tried to tell Mars that she believed that one day a beautiful girl would come. However, Mars told the voice that she misunderstood his words, as he explained that he just wanted to give her thanks for helping him all this time. He asked her what she wanted her own body to be, and Yue was silent for a moment, before she admitted that she wanted to touch Mars with her own hand, asking if it was possible. Mars knew that it was impossible to create life from nothing, but when he was in the protected area, he realized that certain skills can only create a body without a consciousness. However, this time there would be a consciousness prepared beforehand due to Yue, and could make it likely for Mars to be able to transfer her into a body. Mars activated his skill lender and seized Tina's skill, Wings of the Angel, and evolved it into the Blessing of the Seraph. This evolution would be enough to create an entire person from scratch, and he told Yue to get ready to transfer herself into the real world, to which she did and matched the coordinate of each muscle fiber. Mars held out his arm, and the body of a woman started to form out of thin air, quickly finishing the process as Yue's new form had now been made. She leaned against him in silence, before her eyes slowly opened and she finally spoke out loud for the first time, asking Mars if she could ask him 2 questions. He let the girl down and agreed to answer her questions, asking what they were. Yue explained that she had only been calling Mars by the word you for the time being, and asked what she should call him now that she has a body in the real world, and Mars said that his own name was just fine. But Yue believed that it would be inappropriate to do so as he was her creator and owner. From the information she gathered from the past, Yue concluded that she should call him by Master, proceeding to pose as she did so and calling him Master in a more cutesy way. Because of that, Mars quickly ordered her to call him just Master only, realizing that the memory Yue must have gotten was from when Gordon snuck into a maid bar. Her second question was about her lack of clothes, to which Mars became alarmed by the fact that he forgot such an important detail, starting to sweat as he caught himself staring at Yue's body for a moment. He knew that the healing skill of Tina's could only affect the body, but could even affect armor when its range was strengthened. However, it would not create clothing from zero. Mars started to look through his storage, even if Yue said that she didn't mind staying like that, and he found spare clothes for her to wear. Yue smiled warmly and admitted that she was happy because it smelled just like her master, causing Mars to grin at the words until he told her that she shouldn't make an expression like that in the human world. Yue saw the world through his eyes, but her sense of reality was still low, which meant that they needed to learn slowly together from now on. And with that done, it was time for them to start their journey, and find a place to raise Vritra. They were going to need a place away from the city, as Vritra was a giant snake, along with the fact that Mars was tired of socializing. Just before they left, Yue had a small problem, as she didn't know which foot to use first when walking, and Mars knew that it was going to be a long journey while bringing along this girl. Besides that, Mars had already seized 2 unique skills from the Sword of the Divine Silver, which left Ultra's Sword Saint and Gordon's Obsidian. But there was no need to hurry. He was going to get back what was his. Meanwhile, Ultra and the others were drinking at a table inside a bar. The long-haired swordsman was bragging about how he used his skill to cut the large frozen snake to pieces, until Mars betrayed everyone, which prevented a supposed triumphant return. These were all obvious lies, but Ultra still tried to keep up the facade even when someone asked where the corpse was of the boss. People around wondered as to how Mars beat 4 S-rank people and started to discuss the possibilities. But to Ultra's luck, they still believed that the group was still stronger than Mars, and there had to be another explanation. Tina was impressed as to how the lies were believed so easily, but Ultra was more focused on where Mars was. The 4 of them were found a week ago because of the mining group, but Mars had already been gone from the city for 3 days before they all woke up and already reported the situation to the guild. Ultra got even angrier after hearing the relay of information from Tina, and he wondered what was going on, proceeding to yell at a waitress for more beer. Tina demanded him to stop being rude, as it would potentially worsen her image and cause trouble with the church, and Ultra decided to project his anger onto another member, that person being Elia. The girl was quietly munching away at a piece of bread before being yelled at by Ultra to say something, to which she did as told, clearing her throat before speaking. She made a realization at that moment, alarming the long-haired swordsman, before she said that eating bread soaked in corn soup was amazing. Ultra was confused to hear such an unexpected response from Elia, even if he agreed with her about the food being tasty. But the girl continued to eat the food happily, singing to herself while spilling the food messily, which confused Ultra even more. People have said that Elia was a genius girl who wrote the multi-dimensional interpretation of uncertain noise on mana tuning thesis, and was the holder of the unique wisdom skill that made the academic society excited for her findings. But it seemed as though there was not even a glimpse of that in the girl at the moment. This entire situation was starting to give the swordsman a bad feeling. As Mars and Yue walked down the wide roads throughout the land, Mars was explaining things about the world, such as who the Duke of Abik was and what he did. He asked the girl if she got used to walking, to which she confirmed, even if she was still getting used to walking on places that weren't the main road. The dark-haired boy explained that it was expected for the main road to provide safety and comfort, since it was the one that connected towns and was used by many people and lords, and had tax involved. Yue asked what tax was, and Mars explained that it was money that was used to help with things such as moving soldiers for monster subjugation. And one of the towns that was built to help generate this revenue was Kinui, the town they were about to approach, that had a population of about 100 people. Yue spoke once again and asked if their situation and story were contradictory, while looking back at all the corpses that were seemingly following behind them. Zombies, poison cats, night hounds, and fire slimes all in one night of camping. They could have easily used spatial jump, but Mars wanted to take the time for Yue to learn about things. He heard that humans who held skills emitted unique mana, and Mars started to believe that there was a chance that the SP he had was inviting all the monsters to them. But Yue heard his thoughts and said that it was okay because they could repel it with skills. She was impressed with and praised Mars for his creativity in activating spatial jump around their tent, which would automatically throw monsters into the sky and fall to the ground. He was still worried about the number of monsters and said that they should hurry toward their destination, Kinui, the inn town. It was called that because it was a place where mainly adventurers took a rest during travels. They arrived and started to explore the small town, even making a purchase of a baked sweet for Yue. But their exploration was interrupted by a girl falling to the ground and being yelled at by a man for slacking. Mars's eyes widened when he noticed the girl's ears and tail, as he realized that this girl was of a certain race. She was a werewolf. Yue asked if werewolves were rare, to which Mars confirmed, explaining that they originally lived in the forests around the area until a war with the humans chased them out of their land. The grassland around used to be a forest, but after the war it fell into human hands and got cut down and became neglected. Then the person who took over and developed the ruined land was Duke Abik. Werewolves were people who showed the strength in the forest, with their fangs and claws with a body covered with fur, blessed by the wolf god, meaning that they were a proud race. Yue asked if that girl was really part of the werewolves that Mars heard from stories, but he was starting to believe that the legend was different to what was reality. He still wondered why a descendant of a werewolf was being treated like a slave, thinking that the loss in the war meant enough to where they would become lower than humans. A man walked in and called everyone in for lunchtime, which the girl was able to get due to finishing her morning quota, but she was only given a bowl of diluted soup with a piece of dirty bread. This very meal was the same food that was given to Mars when he was in the Sword of Divine Silver, and it was clear that the rest of the workers had better quality food than the girl. Yue knew what was going on inside Mars's head and piped in to tell Mars that he shouldn't be afraid to act if he wished to help someone in front of him. And these words were enough motivation for the dark-haired boy to take action, even if it meant staying in the town for 10 days longer. Mars asked the man to talk with the boss who was in the inside office, and Mars went to talk with this man for some time before proceeding to walk up to the werewolf girl. He said that he heard her story and learned that her wage was 3,000 yin every time that she would carry all the wheat bags to the warehouse. But he knew that the amount of work she was given was not something that could be done in a day. The girl said that it got cut 300 yin per day for food, and Mars cut in, saying that such an amount was all for muddy soup, and these words caused her to glare at him and ask what he wanted from her. Mars was impressed by the strong, unwavering glare despite the bad condition that she was in, and how her eyes still had some of the pride that Mars had heard from the legend. If this girl was just a kid, Mars was intending to give her some money and then leave, but he was going to do things differently. He asked her to give him 600 yen from her wage in order to earn money 10 times more than what she already makes. Mars heard that her skill was leg strengthening and offered to extend the skill duration for many weeks and be able to finish carrying all the wheat bags by the next day. She sat there in silence and was thinking about it, before Mars continued by drawing the expenses into the ground and asking if she understood the math, which she felt offended by the fact that he even asked. As he thought, this girl was raised properly, which made him even more confused as to why she was in a place like this, making him wonder if she was being used by someone or not. After Mars explained the exchange that was to happen, he gave the girl the choice. but she said that even if she were to finish the job faster, she would not give him the money. Mars knew that was not how he wanted things to go, but he agreed anyway, standing up and telling Yue to get ready for the transfer. He activated the skill lender skill and started the loan process, and realized that he would need a name for the process, making him introduce himself as Mars Sho to the girl and asking for her name, to which she said it was Shizuku. Mars loaned the duration enhancement skills to the girl, and Shizuku stood up with a surprised expression, already feeling as though there was a change in her body. After the process was done, he gave her a little gift, which was one of the baked goods he had bought with Yue from the local shop as proof of their business. He asked the girl if her lunchtime was over, and Shizuku jumped in shock and ran off to continue her job, while Yue watched and asked the dark-haired boy why he charged her money instead of doing things for free. Mars explained that there was still a pride in her eyes, and how Shizuku wouldn't have accepted the help if it was an act of sympathy. The very same day, she finished the job, unexpectedly in Mars's eyes, and the two were waiting outside the building while the werewolf girl was collecting her wage. Shizuku walked out and thanked the dark-haired boy, as he told her that she should find a better job, and earn more until the 10th day when she would have to repay the loan. She gave the boy 600 yen as promised, being told by Mars that he hoped that she would get a better job this time. But she didn't seem too happy to hear those words and walked off with a forced smile. The next day, Mars and Yue were walking through the streets after doing some shopping, but as they walked by an alleyway, they noticed a silhouette. That silhouette was Shizuku, and she was desperately chewing on a plant while sitting near a puddle, which confused Mars as to what she was doing. Once more, Ultra and the others were at the tavern, except Ultra seemed more irritated than usual. He thought about how if he couldn't take back the reward for capture, he wouldn't be able to calm down. Ultra wondered how Mars was still alive and how the dungeon was cleared after everyone had gotten paralyzed and passed out. During his fit of anger, Gordon ran through the doors with good news, sweating after all the running he had been doing. Gordon had been saying his feet were feeling strangely heavier and how he was getting slower, and Ultra thought that it was potentially about time to throw him away as well. Dismissing his thoughts, Ultra asked what the reason the guild was calling them for this time, and Gordon said that Lord Abik had found out that they had supposedly captured the Devil's Abyss, and was inviting them to meet with him and show him their skills. The long-haired swordsman calmed down and slammed down his beer, saying that his way to true S rank wasn't completely gone. In the past few years, Sword of Divine Silver was on the top with their performance, and now it was time for them to get prestige. Ultra slammed his hands onto the table and told everyone that they were going to finally be able to make connections and even have a chance to become nobles if they wanted. He started to feel as though it was the right call to kick Mars out of the party. After all, he didn't want even one incompetent person in the party. Ultra heard that the reason was conquered from a war against the demi-human race, meaning that the Lord of the Abik House was likely a fighting type, causing the long-haired swordsman to suggest that they would show him his Sword Saint skill. He added that they could show Angel's white wings while they were at it, but Tina frantically said that it would be enough with just Ultra's skill. But that tone of voice confused Gordon, as he noticed that there was something strange. Ultra sat there while smiling evilly, believing that the Sword of Divine Silver was never going to fail, as long as his Sword Saint skill still existed. His Sword Saint skill was one that focused on speed, and so without the dynamic vision enchantment that Mars lent, what would happen? It would also be another 10 days until the group would learn that Ultra already lost the Hawkeye's skill. However, that was a thought for another time, as Mars and Yue were focused on Shizuku sitting in the alleyway. The werewolf girl noticed them and looked in horror before quickly running away, dropping the hand-rotten grass roots that she was eating. He knew that these plants were something that could be eaten as an emergency food, but they contained a poison that would rot a person's hand if they ate too much of it, hence the name. It was strange why the girl was doing this, since she should have supposedly gotten paid less than a day ago. But he realized something and told Yue to find Shizuku while he would meet the man who hired her. Mars met the bald man who claimed that he paid Shizuku properly, the wage being only 600 yen since he had to cut the wages due to not wanting to be out of business. However, after enough arguing with the man, Mars realized more things about the situation. He learned that the real and main reason why he cut the wage for the girl was because she was a werewolf. Mars started to feel as though this man was just like the people he used to be in a party with, gaining a new perspective about how there were certain humans in the world that existed, ones who would exploit and destroy others for their benefit. If it was a bandit, their goals and actions would match. But people like the man in front of Mars were different, as their goals and actions wouldn't match, as they would live lives by exploiting good people. The bald man told the dark-haired boy that it was a clever way of thinking, and proceeded to ask for payment over the information that he had given about Shizuku. But as Mars took out the money, he had a darkness over his face, and asked for the man's hands. He dropped the money into the man's hands, and activated his spatial rupture skill, immediately slicing off the bald man's hand and dropping money everywhere. A scream rang through the building as the bald man processed that his hand had been cut off, and he collapsed to the floor while crying about the pain. But Mars didn't bat an eye and picked up some of the money on the ground, placing it into the other hand of the bald man, asking him why he couldn't take it properly, since it was the money that the bald man loved so much. Mars stood tall as the bald man held his arm in pain, sweat dripping down his face as he stared at the dark-haired male with fear while asking what Mars did to him. Mars brought a foot down onto the severed hand of the man before asking him if he knew what Shizuku ate that day. But the bald man didn't know what Mars was talking about and said that he didn't care about something like that. The dark-haired boy knew that it was impossible to have a conversation with this man, and how it would be better to give him a taste of his own medicine, in order to get people like this man to understand their actions of preying upon people like Shizuku. Even then, Mars believes that the werewolf girl didn't intend to repay her debt, nor even stand up for herself against this man by her own choice. However, despite that, Shizuku still kept her promise in paying Mars back, which means that Mars was ready to fight this man in her place, as he was the one who already lost his pride and honor a long time ago. The bald man said that Mars didn't have any rights to do what he did, but Mars believed otherwise, as the man didn't pay Shizuku properly, and the bald man tried to give the reason was because she didn't deserve to be paid like a human when she was a werewolf. Mars walked closer, which made the man yelp in fear and scoot away, as the dark-haired boy explained that he invested his skill in her and was there to collect the profit the man gained from his skill. The bald man continued to shout that the money was his, but he was interrupted by Mars picking up the severed hand and asking for confirmation if the 3,000 yen was reduced to 600. Mars told the man that the same exchange of the wage being reduced to 1/5 would be satisfied with his left hand and both of his feet, as Mars could just heal it as many times as he needed, making the bald man start to hyperventilate. Suddenly, the walls of the building fell apart and all of the citizens could see what was going on inside the building, and how the room was in complete disarray with money lying all over the floor. The bald man continued to heave for breath while whining in fear, as Mars said that they can continue their talk now, walking even closer to the shorter man. Mars reminded the man that he wasn't bluffing, but the dark-haired boy knew that controlling others through fear wasn't a method he would commend. However, he wanted the bald man to regret his actions, if regret was indeed a feeling that this human could ever feel. Suddenly, a knock was at the door. It was Yue who told Mars that she had Shizuku with her and asking what to do next. The office was wrecked in half and people could see them from the outside, but there was still a reason to use a door in the situation in Mars's opinion. Mars decided to activate his Blessing of the Seraph skill, and grow the bald man's limb once again before allowing the two girls inside, the door falling down with ease because the entire room was falling apart in the first place. The werewolf girl was surprised at the state of the place, as Mars asked her how she was, to which Shizuku timidly said that she was feeling fine, before asking what happened. Mars didn't answer and instead turned to Yue, who said that the werewolf girl only ingested a small amount of poison. The dark-haired boy turned to Yue and said that was good to hear, before turning back to the bald man and asking about the money once more. Fortunately, the bald man had changed his behavior in a short amount of time and bowed before Mars, saying that he had unfairly paid Shizuku. Mars leaned down and said that the man was going to give Shizuku her medicine and late fee, snatching the bag before grabbing a singular gold coin and giving it to Shizuku, with the value being 100,000 yen. The werewolf girl was shocked to have received so much for these fees, while the bald man was left puzzled by how little he expected it to be, as Mars threw the money back to the bald man's arms. The man asked why so little was taken, instead of Mars being greedy, but Mars explained that taking any more than he should have would have made him the same as the bald man. Mars realized something and gave a coin of his own to the shorter man, saying that it was for the office repair expenses. However, just before he gave the coin, Mars activated his 6 arms of Ashura skill, and sent the coin flying at high speeds toward the bald man before it smacked him in the forehead, causing him to scream in pain once again. Mars walked away and said that all debts had been cleared, while the bald man held his head before sitting back up, tears in his eyes. Just before the dark-haired boy left, Mars said that they now owed each other nothing at all, likely expecting the shorter male to come after him now. As Mars, Yue, and Shizuku left with money in hand, people started running to the bald man's side and asked if he was okay. He shook his head to shake off the pain and raised his head with an expression of rage, veins popping as he ordered everyone around him to call a person named Foreman Eldro to come at that moment. Mars told the two girls that they should get cleaned up and buy some clothes, as there was no reason for them to want to keep wearing what they were already wearing. He activated his storage skill and put away the large bag that he had, before walking off with the two to a bathhouse to get cleaned up, and then to a clothing shop to get some more comfortable and well put together clothes. They finally ended up at an inn to rest at for the night, and Mars admired how much different Yue seemed to look. watching her help put on the new clothes for the werewolf girl. Shizuku said that it was her first time wearing clothes like the ones on her now, and Mars was in disbelief that he ever mistaken the girl for a boy. The dark-haired boy called for Shizuku's attention, and asked her if she was really fine with the clothes that she had, and the short girl started to stammer and get flustered as she wondered if his question meant that it looked weird on her. He reassured her that that was not the case, as he said that she didn't need to hold back and choose clothes with more fabric. But Yue explained that the choice of clothing was not for reducing the cost, but for rather the design, to which Mars said that he was just joking. Mars pushed the jokes aside and told Shizuku that it looked good on her, making her even more timid and flustered as she pulled at her ears and thanked the boy for the compliment, as she explained that she liked the style of clothes. He suddenly changed the subject to ask Shizuku about the bald man, asking her why she backed off from him after he had not paid her properly, and why she didn't try to get her deserved wage until the end, even when she was only eating the hand-rotten grass root because of the lack of agreed pay. Mars tried to tell her how he thought that she could win it if she fought, but Shizuku finally spoke and explained that the werewolf race can't use their power for themselves, no matter how bad the opponent is and no matter how frustrating it is. The short girl suddenly looked determined as she announced that if she found someone that deserved her risking her life for them, only then could she use her wolf power. Mars flashed a small smile and told Shizuku that she was really strong, before slowly standing up, starting to get excited after seeing the legend of werewolves unfolding in front of his very eyes. Even when Shizuku was drenched in mud or eating poisonous grass, she would never lose her pride. He stood in front of her and calmly asked for confirmation about her using her power for this someone, to which she said that she would be able to, until she asked why he wondered that. And that was when Mars quickly explained that there was a group of armed men coming for the inn. From what his perception skill could sense, he could see about 40 men wearing armor and weapons. He wondered if it was the mercenary group that was staying in town. But what was most important was the fact that the one leading the group was in fact the very same man who hired Shizuku, who stood beside the foreman, likely with the intention of getting back on Mars for what he did to the bald man. This information caused a rage to course through Shizuku's body, before Mars asked her if he could be that someone to her, and she agreed without hesitation as she would not forget the favor he had done for her. With this in mind, Mars believed that the decision was to fight, since the werewolf girl could fight as well. He asked her if the duration enhancement skill he lent her would be enough, and Shizuku was confident that it would be. But Yue felt as though it would be too dangerous for the girl if her skills were only leg strengthening and duration enhancement. However, Mars didn't feel worried at all, and reassured Yue, as he already knew the truth of the situation, turning to Shizuku and asking her to confirm that her skill wasn't leg strengthening in the first place. She was silent for a moment in surprise, and asked how he knew the entire time, to which the dark-haired boy explained that the information that he heard from her made the skill not sound too complicated, which meant that she was likely hiding the true power of her secret skill, and how she tricked people by telling them that she was a kid or demi-human. Shizuku apologized for lying and explained that it was in fact true that she couldn't use it for a long time, and how she hated being used by people if they knew her skill. Mars asked her to show it and she hesitated for a moment, before nodding and immediately charging it up, a bright light enveloping her body as Shizuku called upon the spirits of their fathers to bless her with their power as their descendant. Both Mars and Yue stared with bewilderment as their eyes widened while watching Shizuku activate her skill, Armor of the Fanged Wolf. As the skill was activated at full power, claws of energy formed around her hands. It was at that moment that Mars realized that the legends held true about how the werewolves showed their unrivaled strength in the forest, with their fangs and claws and a body covered with fur blessed by the wolf god. All made true because of this skill. Without anyone saying a word, the werewolf girl said that she was off and charged out of the room with a determined expression, ready to fight each and every person out there with her true power. The mercenaries continued marching down the street, until a flash of light charged through a good amount of people, sending them flying as the bald man and foreman stared with confusion. That was until the bald man realized who caused the commotion. It was Shizuku, who knew that they were there for Mars. She asked them if they wanted some money, a woman, or Mars's life, but the two men laughed and told her to spare the trouble, as the foreman explained that it was everything they wanted. Everything from Mars. Shizuku held her head low in disappointment, before the foreman took out a long whip and believed that the werewolf girl was trying to bluff, with a light around her body that held no meaning. If these people were here to try and take everything from Mars, Shizuku was also going to try to take everything from these people. The foreman threatened her to try it, as he proceeded to swing his whip at her, saying that he was going to teach her how to count with a whip that has an arm strengthening skill on it. However, before the man could finish his words, Shizuku charged forward, which surprised the foreman and made him sweat in confusion, as the werewolf girl repeated these same words back to him about learning how to count. She proceeded to punch the foreman in the gut and shouted the first number, as blood spurted out of his mouth. The foreman grunted loudly in pain as his arms clutched at his chest and gut, jumping back to create distance from the short werewolf girl. However, Shizuku was far from done. She continued to dash toward the tall male and proceeded to kick him in the face before he could react, and continuing to count farther. Mars was silently staring out the window and letting Shizuku do all the fighting, as this was her fight, not his. He started to think about what could be the reason for her to not use her claw attack, and wondered if it was because of Shizuku's grudge or if it was simply because of her compassion. The girl told the foreman that he could count up to 100 billion, meaning that this battle could go on forever until he either called his loss or would be forced to lose by Shizuku's hand. He was on the ground, holding his bloody face before growling in anger, and asking why she was so powerful at that moment. He believed that she was supposedly only supposed to be a dog with a poor skill, and couldn't accept the situation that was unfolding before him, slamming a fist onto the ground in a rage. Mars noticed the feelings that the man had, but knew that all his words were nonsense and remembered the talk that Mars had with the foreman's boss that day. He could finally understand after talking with the bald man, who was seemingly named Garen after Mars talked around with people, and realized that these kinds of people would only think that Shizuku didn't fight back because she was weak, and couldn't imagine any other reason for it. That was what was happening to this man. He couldn't understand nor accept the situation. Honor and goodwill. Yet there were people who used their power for evil, but to them, there's only, if you can't hit back, that means you're a fool and you are weak. And for Ultra and the others, Mars seemed to be a person who was one of those fools, and one of the weak creatures. What Shizuku had been doing at this moment was carving her message into the body of her enemies that they had made a big mistake, and that she was more powerful than they could possibly have imagined. This was Mars's first time to see an endemic skill used firsthand, especially to this extent of power. Shizuku seemed to have a speed that defied physics, as Mars knew that he wouldn't be able to follow the girl's speed with just normal human eyes, making him appreciate the fact that he had the God's Eye skill. He intended to join the battle if necessary, but with Shizuku's condition, it seems that there was not going to be a case where he would need to do so. Yue watched with a light in her eyes, impressed by how fierce the werewolf girl was, and asked Mars if the skill that Shizuku had was different from a unique skill. She asked for confirmation that her knowledge came directly from the skill that she owned, and Mars said that it was, as he started to realize why Yue didn't know a skill that was only mentioned in the skill books. Mars explained that the skill that Shizuku had was special, a skill that depended on the training of a person, and that was one that every person in the world can get with no discrimination was a common skill. A skill that was based on one individual's quality, that was a unique skill. These two types of skills could still be found in many places, but there was a type of skill that a person could only find locally. There was a saying that there was a power called mana flowing in the world, and was constantly circulating in the world to help shape the land, topography, and climate. Others say that particular characteristics of the land was caused by a special species. Sometimes there would come a being that was compatible with the special mana coursing through the lands, and these beings could use a special skill because of it. A land-based skill is deeply rooted in the land where it would be born and raised, and in that particular location, the skill would show an unrivaled strength. The legend said that werewolves used to be lords of the land that were armed with mana that flowed into the land, making them stronger, faster, and more fierce the longer the fight would last. This was the endemic skill that Shizuku had, Armor of the Fanged Wolf. Her mana activity would skyrocket to high levels, reaching level 905 at that moment, as she roared loudly to strike fear and show her power and her blazing rage. As long as Shizuku was fighting on this land, there was no one who could beat her. Mars's thoughts were interrupted by what seemed to be the sound of Shizuku's inner voice, that screamed and chanted repeatedly in her mind the words, "Give it back." The dark-haired boy was impressed by the fact that he could understand what the girl was thinking, despite only knowing Shizuku for a short amount of time, and still not knowing anything about the girl or her reason for coming to this place. However, despite what he was thinking, he still couldn't help but be alarmed by the blazing anger and dark look in Shizuku's eyes, as she screamed at the people she was fighting to give something back to her. Shizuku was filled with an unimaginable amount of rage at this point, chanting at every one of the people she fought that they should give it back to her. Her mana activity reached level 4064 as the short girl continued to charge and claw through all of the mercenaries with ease. No one seemed to be a match for the girl, as everyone seemed to be defeated within seconds, as the werewolf girl continued her chants. The things that she wanted back were simple: her money, her time, her dignity. She wanted all of those back. Bodies that spilled blood from under their armor flew through the sky, as Shizuku shouted in anger as Garen seemed to run away while sweating with fear, not wanting to be involved with the enraged woman, and instead letting the mercenaries take care of her and be a distraction while the bald man would try to make an escape. Mars noticed what was happening and knew that it was time for him to step in and make a move to help, letting Yue know that they should go, since the dark-haired boy had an idea of where the bald man ran off to. He activated his spatial jump and swiftly teleported back to the very same destroyed building from earlier, way before Garen had the time to run there, the bald man still seemingly exhausted from all the running. Mars told the shorter male that he was slow and needed to exercise more, but Garen was more focused and alarmed on the mere fact that the two were there at the place he was trying to run to. The dark-haired boy knew that the bald man was looking for something from the space below the ground, confusing Garen at how Mars figured that out. But Mars reminded the shorter male about how he buried his severed arm underground before Shizuku and the others came. If a person were to make a mistake when putting in the coordinates when using the spatial jump skill, there was a chance of ending up inside of a wall, which was why it was important to use the perception skill to scan a person's destination. At the time that Mars put the arm underground, that was when Mars realized that there was a weird amount of space underground, meaning that there was likely a hiding spot for Garen. The bald man salivated from his mouth in anger and asked if Mars was trying to stop him from escaping Shizuku, calling Mars a devil. Yue asked Mars if Garen was trying to make a joke, and the dark-haired boy said that it was better if she thought of it that way. Quickly turning back to Garen, Mars tried to explain to the shorter male that he was going to die no matter if he hid or ran, as it would just be like a straw house for Shizuku, with just one blow for it to all be over. The mercenaries were fighting because they were being paid, but Garen was different, because in the end, he was just a civilian. If Shizuku were to do something bad to the shorter male, it would count as a crime, and these words caused Garen to think that it meant that Mars was going to protect him, but that was not the case whatsoever. Yue asked if Garen's current words were a joke too, and Mars played along and confirmed as so, making the shorter male confused at the situation before Mars ordered the bald man to not move even one step, as Shizuku was on her way there at that moment. Mars asked if Garen had already forgotten his skill, about how the dark-haired boy could even regrow a severed arm, which meant that he didn't care how Garen was going to end up, as Mars was sure that he would still heal the shorter male later. Shizuku proceeded to arrive seconds later with a blank expression on her face, and her mana activity at level 81,937. The moment that the werewolf girl had arrived there, Garen tried to desperately beg for Mars to help him, but the dark-haired boy did not budge whatsoever, and just watched with a bored look on his face as Shizuku let out her anger on the shorter male. A scream of both pain and fear rang through the building, and the battle was finally over. 3 days later, Mars and the others walked through the town while trying to keep their heads low, as it seemed as though every single citizen had their eyes on them, but it was not for negative reasons. An old man walked up to them and asked if the three of them wanted to go somewhere, but Mars said that they didn't need any assistance, as the place they wanted to go was just around the corner. Mars felt exhausted with just how many people seemed to keep talking to him, and wondered how many times it had happened during that day, and Yue was there for the rescue and proceeded to answer that it was 8 couples and 14 individuals. The day after Shizuku beat up Garen's group, people found almost 40 mercenaries beaten up on the streets, and it caused quite the uproar in Kanui. All people could talk about was the fact that Garen was fighting with a great traveler, only to get beaten up by said traveler instead, and the town calmed down after this rumor had spread. This would be fine if it weren't for the fact that people kept interacting with them. People would greet them and ask about the weather, people would come to ask about the powerful skill that cut down the group, and people would seemingly come to ask if Mars had a girlfriend, before quickly backing off when seeing the 2 women who were with him, even if he didn't answer the question in the first place. Everyone was either bothering them, taking the rumor too far, or even looking at the 3 of them with a more favorable expression, all because of Garen. Mars wondered what that bald man had done to people to come to hate him so much. Shizuku walked up to the dark-haired boy and felt embarrassed by how much everyone had been talking to her as well, not knowing what to do with all the money and things that have been given to her. Both Mars and Yue tried to explain to the girl what to do in order to get a job and the daily and monthly wages for it, but it all seemed to go over the werewolf girl's head as she slumped down onto the floor and waited for the 2 to stop their conversation. Shizuku called out to them and wondered how long they were going to stay in town, and Mars had surprisingly said that they were going to use up all the money they had just received before they ever thought of leaving, in order to keep the economy in check. At a certain time, money is a something that has a value, and could be used to be collateral like starting a business or as a precaution of an emergency. It wasn't as if Mars was troubled with money, but he felt as though it would be more wise to use the money at that town instead of anywhere else. Shizuku understood Mars's decision, but Yue felt as though he should not be thinking for others so much. after all that had happened to him in the past. She tried to insist that he didn't understand her desires for the boy, as she decided that she would put it in her power to be the one thinking about how to make him happy, causing Mars to sigh in disappointment about getting scolded. After that, Mars said that it was time to go, and activated the spatial jump skill in order to teleport them to a jewelry store. This was the only place in Kanui where the three of them could spend 700 million yen in one go. And Mars asked the werewolf girl if she ever had taken a peek, to which she said that she had, but didn't feel as though she belonged. Mars felt the same. Before dismissing his thoughts and proceeding to walk into the shop with the other two, before being greeted by a long-haired woman, Mars dropped the bags of money onto the counter and surprised the long-haired girl by the amount of money. He asked the woman if he could find a set of matching jewelry for the three of them, surprising and alarming Shizuku by the fact that Mars was willing to buy the fact that she was getting jewelry as well. The long-haired woman giggled in happiness about the amount of money, as Yue suddenly called out that it was exactly 747,631 yen, before the woman walked off and said that she had something perfect for the three of them. She walked off behind a curtain and grabbed 3 necklaces that laid upon a metal plate that she brought back. They were all pendants of the queen's jewel from the werewolf race who used to reside in the land, and was used as decoration on their bodies. The mention of the word werewolf caught Shizuku's attention, while Yue's attention was more on the queen's jewel, before Yue herself started to explain that a jewel was an item that possessed mana, and that a sapphire jewel was one that possessed a hot mana. The queen's jewel was more dense than amethyst, and it shined more brightly than aster and could change its color naturally. The woman admitted that she heard that the two of the group were the rumored Mars and Shizuku, and said that it would be perfect for them if they were with the werewolf race, claiming that it was on the house, since she also had bad blood with Garen. Mars gave the item to the werewolf girl, despite Shizuku being hesitant with wanting to accept and wear such an expensive item, but she eventually gave in before wanting to ask Mars something. She took the boy outside of the jewel shop, as she was too embarrassed to say it inside the store, leading Mars to an alleyway and admitting that she wanted to give a reward to him for all that he had done. He was confused as to what it was, since they were in an empty alleyway by themselves. And this had caused an inappropriate thought inside Shizuku's mind about Mars touching her tail, but she quickly shook it away with a blush, and asked for Mars to come to her hometown, the hidden werewolf den. He was not the most interested, until she told him that there existed a dungeon called the Faraway Azure, and he wondered if it was an A rank due to it being a named dungeon, which meant it likely had 40 floors or more and was guarded by a boss. However, Shizuku said that it was an S-rank dungeon hidden from humans, and that it was the only reward she could give right now, grabbing Mars's hands with tears in her eyes as she begged him to save her hometown, as it supposedly needed him. Meanwhile, Ultra and the others were seemingly living the life. The long-haired swordsman was drinking happily, while everyone else sat back comfortably, Gordon saying that it was weird to be treated like a noble instead of a person who was requested to hunt a monster. Elia was busy being distracted by the speed of the carriage, while Tina admitted that she started to feel sorry for Mars for missing the chance to ride a carriage like that. But Gordon said that there wouldn't even be room for them, as 4 people was the limit, which made Ultra laugh. A phenomenon where an undefeated S-rank dungeon boss reached maturity and the monsters started flowing out from the dungeon was called a monster stampede, but it was prevented by capturing the dungeon before they could do so, which was why guilds existed. In a traditional event called a debut show, an adventurer would try to catch the noble's eyes and gain a reward for a party or guild. There was a case where an adventurer who nailed this event was given a court rank by the noble, and this was what Ultra and the others were trying to reach. The location for the debut show was 1 day away if they walked, but Duke Abik sent a carriage, and it seemed to be a real sign of desiring this party for their well-renowned skill. Tina said that it would be fine if they took some more time in the journey, and Ultra agreed before pouring more of his drink into the glass cup. The person who was guiding the carriage along had called for the attention of the members of the Sword of Divine Silver, before letting them know that they were going to be out of town soon and warned them that the shakiness would increase a little. However, even with that, this same man still tried to reassure that the carriage, even on uneven roads, would not make the carriage spill one's tea. While that may have been true, the driver did not expect to run into boars on the path outside of the city. And while Ultra was trying to take a sip of his drink with confidence, he was soon humbled by immediately spilling it on himself, after claiming that there was no need to worry. He yelped in surprise as the drink stained his clothes, while Gordon held a hand to his face either to stifle a laugh or for another reason. Ultra poked his head out the window to criticize the driver for making the long-haired swordsman spill his wine on his brand new armor, to which the carriage driver apologized until Ultra realized that there were boars on the road. While they were small fries in his eyes, he was still confused as to why they were on the main road of all places. Ultra pulled his body back inside the carriage and tried to order Gordon to do something about the situation. But Gordon still had a hand to his mouth and claimed that he had gotten a little carsick after the carriage had jerked in movement suddenly just moments ago. Elia was asleep despite all the noise, and Tina was the healer of the group and seemingly couldn't fight. So Ultra decided to put the matters into his own hands and fight the boar as a warm-up before the trip to Duka Beak. A couple of poison boars are normally difficult for A rank, but there were only 2 and Ultra believed that he could handle it as he was S rank. He activated his Sword Saint skill and one of the boars was killed, but Ultra soon realized that things were faster than normal and he would crash into a nearby tree. He grunted in pain and held his body as he gripped his blade, wondering what had happened since he still believed that he had the Hawk's Eye skill, and should still be able to see the enemies when using the Sword Saint, but now he couldn't see anything. Ultra decided to blame his problem on him drinking too much wine, and he took a deep breath, aiming the sword for the last boar after believing that the crash sobered him up and should make him cut the next one cleanly. Activating the skill once again, the boar was killed just as expected, but it was not as clean as Ultra had wanted, and he had gotten his sword stuck in the ground and got thrown many feet before clutching his body in pain once again. The long-haired swordsman was even more confused before he had a flashback to what Mars told him about having to return everything that they had borrowed, and this information made Ultra start to hyperventilate and foam at the mouth. There was only one more day until Ultra would have to present his Sword Saint skill in the debut show. And in what seemed like a flash, the day for the debut show came. People surrounded the seats of a large coliseum as Duka Beak stood proudly from the highest balcony of the place. Another man beside the Duke was announcing what would be happening that day. He told everyone that the Sword of Divine Silver would be doing the debut show, and the 4 stood beside each other while waiting for the man to continue talking. Gordon stood strong. Elia was confused and exhausted, and Ultra and Tina both seemed to be sweating with worry, while Tina was the one showing the most emotion and knowing that something was likely to go wrong during the show. The announcer said that the group was going to use the skills that were used to clear the Devil's Abyss, and asked for them to show it to everyone in the audience as much as they would like. Ultra knew that this was a chance that never came twice, and he could absolutely not fail. Not in front of a noble. The long-haired swordsman was going to successfully show his battle skills and make Duka Beak acknowledge his power and turn Ultra into a noble. The announcer spoke once again and told them that the nobles had deployed an A-rank party to prepare the monsters that Ultra had requested to be the opponent, while the very same A-rank party was watching the show and guarding the audience just in case anything would happen. Ultra started to sweat in worry once again as he knew that things wouldn't be good. However, he still tried to reassure himself that it would be fine, as long as he would instantly cut the enemy even if he couldn't see anything. The demon that Ultra had asked for the people hosting the show to prepare was a species with a hard shell, and would keep fighting even if they lost their head. The Berserker of the Underground. Army Ants. Even if the gate was not open, Ultra could tell that it was a swarm, and that there were almost 50 of the monsters ready to fight. Gordon called for Ultra's attention and asked if it was better for them to say something to the nobles and audience before they would begin, and the long-haired swordsman took a breath, before loudly speaking that they were going to use their sword to smash the demons and present a rain of blood to be looked forward to. This lack of professionalism made the lady turn away and hold her mouth to stifle a laugh, while Duka Beak stood there in silence waiting for what was to happen. With that, Ultra said that it was time to begin, and he whispered to Gordon to be quiet and stand guard, telling Gordon to try and gather the ants around him as much as he could. Gordon was confused by the request but agreed, and now it was time for the debut show to begin. As the cage was now slowly being opened, ants began to pour out. Gordon slammed his shield and planted it into the dirt ground, before proceeding to activate his obsidian skill as the army ants poured out of the wooden gate. They were all clumped together in a group, and charged at Gordon without hesitation. He seemed ready for the monsters since all of the ants crashed into the shield with a large force, starting to slowly chip away at the shield slightly with their mandibles. Gordon grunted in frustration and exhaustion at how strong the army ants were, and how they started to gather together and push against the shield, instead of just a few focusing on it at a time. Ultra praised Gordon for the job he was doing, and the long-haired swordsman raised his blade, while telling Gordon to continue holding the ants back as Ultra proceeded to activate his Sword Saint skill. However, as expected, Ultra still couldn't control his skill because he did not have the Hawk's Eye skill anymore. Because of this, he had crashed into the nearby wall of the Coliseum with a grunt, alarming Gordon and the rest of the audience. A displeased expression came over Duka Beak's face, and the A-rank adventurer stood at the sidelines with surprised expressions, while Gordon stood in confusion, furrowing his eyebrows as he asked Ultra what he was doing. Ultra started to stand up as the debris fell to the ground next to him, while he stared back with a worried look, quickly jumping back and pretending that nothing happened. He told the Duke that he had only just gotten a little nervous, and will proceed to win the battle with his next attack. but Duke Beak stayed silent during this exchange of words, as it seemed as though his faith in the swordsman was starting to decrease. Ultra turned back around to face the army ants, and tried to activate his Sword Saint skill once again, but it did not work and he collapsed and skidded across the ground. He tried again, but to no avail did it work, and he crashed down once more as the ants continued to crawl toward Gordon. The long-haired swordsman was starting to get worried about how the show was starting to look, due to the actions he had been presenting to everyone. But he still tried to keep his composure despite it slowly dwindling with every second. He tried to play it off and say that he was just kidding, laughing nervously as the debris peeled off his bruised and worried face. Tina stared with a horrified look on her face, as she weakly called out to Ultra, while Elia stayed silent and blankly stared off into the distance. The A-rank adventurers wondered if Ultra could not see the enemies whatsoever, and another one of the adventurers said that it was impossible because of Ultra's Hawkeye's skill. However, more of the adventurers started to discuss with one another, and remembered that the Hawk's Eyes skill was a skill borrowed from Mars, and they wondered if it was returned. They all then remembered that Mars had also lent skills to Gordon, Tina, and Elia. Every one of the adventurers asked themselves how many skills had Mars actually lent to each member of the Sword of Divine Silver. Ultra stood up slowly, and Gordon stared with worry in his eyes as he realized without a doubt that Ultra had lost his Hawk's Eyes skill just by looking at Ultra's condition. This was why Ultra's eyes could not follow the speed of Sword Saint, and why he couldn't see himself before he would crash into walls. That was when the A-rank adventurers knew, despite how hard it was to believe, the truth of the matter. And the reason that the Sword of Divine Silver stood standing was all because the members had borrowed a huge number of skills from Mars. Gordon called out to Tina to do something and to heal Ultra with Angel's white wings, to which she squeaked in surprise and agreed to do so. However, as she hesitatingly raised her arms and tried to activate her skill, nothing seemed to have happened, and silence only occurred. Gordon started to sweat as he watched everything starting to fall apart in front of him. Tina proceeding to try again to activate her skill, and then again, and then again. Alas, nothing worked, and she started to hyperventilate when she confirmed that her power of the angels was truly gone. Tina collapsed to the ground and started to cry as Gordon tried to get her to snap out of it. As Ultra continued his attempts to use his skill, Elia kneeled down to him as he tried to beg her to strengthen him with her ancient magic. But she told him that was not possible, and thought that the next best thing would be to put her saliva on her finger and wipe it on Ultra's face, claiming that his injuries would heal faster with saliva. Suddenly, Ultra remembered the existence of Duke Beak, and turned around with heavy breaths only to realize that the Duke, along with the other nobles, were gone, and a closed door was all that was left. A mortified expression came upon Ultra's face as he screamed in horror from the sight of the closed doors, while Gordon was being overpowered by the ants that swarmed around him, calling out for help. In the end, the A-rank party and Duke Beak's guards had to jump in to help the four, and with that, the worst debut show in history had closed its curtains. A week passed ever since the party's confusion and failure on the debut show, and Ultra was seen sitting on a chair and sulking after what had happened to the four of them. Elia was currently reciting the terrible situation that was unfolding, how it had been a few days since they last saw Tina, and how Gordon had locked himself in his room. Ultra wished for the meeting request he had sent to get accepted, so he could have a chance to make an excuse and still try to prove himself to the Duke. And Elia told the swordsman that it was almost time for the butler to come by and let them know of their reply. Suddenly, the wooden doors opened, and as Elia said, the butler had come by with a reply about the letter Ultra had sent. Ultra stood up from the chair as the butler pulled out and handed a scroll to the long-haired swordsman, who stared with anticipation of the response, slowly grabbing it while Elia watched in the background. He gripped the scroll tightly and tried to beg the butler for a physical meeting with the Duke, with the belief that he would understand if he was talked to. But the butler interrupted him and shoved another paper in front of Ultra's face, of the reply that Duke Beak sent. That very paper was a rejection. But Ultra couldn't help but stay in denial about the whole situation and throw the papers to the ground, while claiming that he didn't feel good that day. The butler held up a hand with 3 fingers and told Ultra to listen, as it seemed as though there was a misunderstanding, explaining that the Duke disliked idle people despite being merciful, as he had already shown tolerance to the group. 1 finger went down, counting down the chances that Ultra had before he messed everything up. And the first chance was the fact that Ultra didn't make a report of having trouble with his skills before the show, which could have allowed the nobles to give the group a chance 2 or 3 months later. However, even if that was the responsible thing to do, Ultra was too prideful to report something like that. It was human nature to try before giving up, which the butler understood and knew that the Duke would still have understood even if Ultra failed his attack in the end. When Ultra failed his first sword attack and fell down at the time, that was proof of his power dwindling. But a second finger went down, as the butler told Ultra that he still took the second cut after his failure. Ultra was confused for a moment, not knowing what that meant, but the butler asked how many cuts he had tried with his uncontrollable sword saint, to which Ultra couldn't answer out of shame. The butler explained that it was not impossible that, if by chance Ultra's attack hit the Lord or Madam, the result would be clear of what would happen to the members of the Sword of Divine Silver. Imprisonment, torture, hanging. Ultra collapsed to the ground with overwhelm, while the butler excused himself, still telling the swordsman that he was still young and needed to keep an open mind and treasure his life. He still tried to beg the butler once again for a chance to talk, but the only answer from the man in the suit was that if there was a natural disaster or people revolting, that would be Ultra's only chance to try and get the Lord to notice him. As the Duke was someone who governed the territory, the butler was sure that there would be another chance for them to meet, despite the very low odds after that very unfortunate day. With a swift departure, the butler left and Elia put a hand to her chin and thought about how she didn't foresee complete rejection. Ultra started to slam at the ground and leave a dent into the wood as he screamed in anger, gripping at his hair as he shouted about how everything was ruined all because of Mars. Elia couldn't use magic anymore, Tina lost her healing power and disappeared, and while Gordon still had his obsidian skill, he had locked himself in his room after being traumatized by the attack of the army ants last time. Ultra's path to become a noble, along with his future, was gone. However, the long-haired swordsman only thought that for a moment, as he suddenly remembered something. He believed that there was one last chance for him to prove the strength of the Sword of Divine Silver, and it was the replacement member for when Ultra kicked out Mars. The genius alchemist Angelina. She wasn't there yet, but Elia mentioned that she had gotten a report that Angelina was already in town that day, causing Ultra to get even more excited about this supposed new chance. Ultra believed that his future wasn't over yet, and that they would find a breakthrough sooner or later, thinking that this was what the butler meant by keeping an open mind. In another building of the city, a girl sat in a chair while talking with a small creature made out of rocks in her hand. This was Angelina, the alchemist that Ultra was looking forward to meeting, and she told the little creature that she was going to arrive at the guild the next day despite her lateness. Her only thoughts being about how she excitedly wondered what kind of person this skill lender was. The next day, Mars and Shizuku stood opposed from one another as the repayment process started. The duration enhancement skill was going to be returned back to the dark-haired boy, the energy lighting up around the girl before flowing back into Mars. Shizuku hung her head low with a disappointed sigh, as she thought that this meant goodbye to the full power of the Armor of the Fanged Wolf skill. Mars reassured the short girl that it wasn't as if she lost her skill entirely, and she could just be lended the skill once again later if Shizuku needed it at any point. But the werewolf girl felt bad about the fact that she can normally only use the skill for about 10 seconds. Suddenly, Yue had congratulated Shizuku for the fact that she can still use the duration enhancement skill without having to be lent it. She was confused, until Mars explained that it had ended up becoming her actual skill, confusing her even more. He was going to tell her the answer why she learned duration enhancement, but he would do it after they would take their next job, proceeding to leave the room through the door. Unexpectedly, there was an old man standing right outside the door. It was the mayor. The mayor leaned on his cane and asked Mars and the other two for a favor while they were to continue living in the town. Yue and Shizuku were confused, as Mars invited the mayor to come inside the room and explain the job even more, as Mars sat on the bed, waiting with anticipation for the old man's next words. The old man said that he was going to get to the point and immediately asked for Mars and the others to take over the job of monster subjugation, as it was an issue that couldn't be left alone. In the last few months, there had been monsters in the vicinity of Kanui that had become increasingly active, and Mars was aware of that, as they had to fight off around 80 of them on their way to the town. He tried to protect the town by hiring around 40 mercenaries, but they had all gotten bedridden before they could do their job, making Mars and Shizuku look at each other in shock when they realized that they were the ones who beat up the mercenaries that one night. The old man saw how shaken up the werewolf girl was and raised a hand in reassurance, telling Shizuku that it was true that Garen and the mercenaries were to blame for that one incident, but it was still true that the town needed to do something about those monsters. The mayor needed someone who could replace the 40 mercenaries, and there was no one other than Mars and the others. Yue asked Mars what the plan was, and he hummed and thought, knowing that it was an unexpected job that didn't have any connection with saving the hidden werewolf den. Shizuku told him that the monster activity was likely because of the dungeon, and that was all it took for Mars to know that they couldn't let it get out of hand and would take care of it, at least until replacements arrived, standing up and telling the others that they were departing right away. They walked out of the building and into the forest as Mars activated his scout's insight and God's eyes, finding out that there were around 100 monsters all over the place. But this was not a problem for the dark-haired boy, as he cut through all of the creatures with his spatial rupture within seconds. As they continued their walk, Mars decided it was a good opportunity to continue their talk from others. Normally, people would either need to learn or practice earnestly to gain 1,000 skill points and then learn a skill. But Mars does it for people before lending them to others. And if a person used said skill more, it would strengthen and even evolve. It would be more accurate to say that he would lend SP to people before lending skills for a period of 10 days or more, even if he could only lend one skill to one person at a time. But there are times when he could lend a range enhancement skill to a person that would affect the whole party. Shizuku was impressed, and said that he could lend 1 million SP to people to create an army. But Mars explained the interest process and said that it would be impossible to pay back such an amount of SP within 10 days, and it would be dangerous to find out what would even happen. There were still many unexplained parts of this skill that Mars didn't want to carelessly approach, so he wasn't going to lend anything that Shizuku couldn't handle. The werewolf girl thought about it for a moment and figured out the math, and realized that using the skill had increased her SP enough to where it was still above 1,000 by the time she returned it back to Mars, which made her excited and tried to ask Mars to lend her another skill. However, Yue suddenly appeared behind her, and explained that her way of thinking was the same as someone who was soon to be doomed by debt, bringing fear into the short girl as she said that she understood. Shizuku stared and watched the others collect materials, her tail wagging in excitement at the sight of the storage skill that he was using. Mars noticed her behavior and asked what skill she wanted, to which she said that she wanted the storage skill that the dark-haired boy had. However, he had to explain to her that it was a combination of 3 different skills to make it function like that. If there really was a regular skill that was similar to what Mars was doing, it would prove to be powerful and become dangerous. He thought about what it would be like to carry all the materials he collects on his back, but it was too scary to think about. Mars proceeded to explain how his storage skill worked, and Shizuku had learned that the dark-haired boy would create an ice cage with his cocytus skill, before using his spatial leap skill to send it flying into the above. The werewolf girl thought that he meant the sky, but he corrected her, and said that there was an area called the Sea of Stars that had been traveled to by an explorer of the past who didn't come back, but left records down from above about this place. He would keep it in a place like that instead of anywhere else because there were too many things that happened on the surface and underground, which could possibly damage the items that he would keep hidden. There was someone who taught Mars something in the past. Choose your skill based on the synergy. But Mars knew that was not something that had ever crossed Ultra's mind. He saw a sword-shaped stick in the ground and picked it up, thinking about how Ultra had likely noticed the loss of the other skills that supported the Sword Saint skill, and the skill would become too much for the long-haired swordsman. The stick crumbled in Mars's hands as he stared into the bright sky, before Yue let him know about a swarm of monsters coming for them. He turned toward Shizuku and asked if she was ready, as she proceeded to activate both of the skills she had, and charged off into the direction of the monsters. 4 days later, when the replacement mercenaries arrived at Kanui, all the monsters around the town had already been subjugated. After the monster subjugation, Mars, Yue, and Shizuku had all finished their task, and decided to go to the mayor's house in order to report the feat and also do another task of theirs. Mars felt a bit mentally exhausted and politely asked Yue to take care of the situation instead of him, but she was not against this decision whatsoever. They entered the building and sat on one of the couches in the building, with a curly-haired woman with glasses sitting at the couch across from them. This woman greeted them and asked what she could do to help them that day, but Mars first asked who she was, to which she let them know that she was the mayor's secretary. The secretary asked once again what their business was, and Mars proceeded to slam an entire ice container onto the floor that appeared from thin air, filled with parts and materials from the monsters that they had fought. He told her that they were there for the monster subjugation request, and were delivering proof of its completion to the mayor. She was alarmed by the sudden appearance of this container, but looked inside and started to sweat from bewilderment, from the amount of materials that were inside just this one barrel of ice, to which Yue affirmed the woman's racing thoughts. Yue hoped that the secretary could buy the materials separately from the reward they would be getting from completing the task as a whole, and was why the group had brought it to the building, along with the 12 other barrels of ice outside in the garden, which only shocked the secretary even more. The secretary wondered what she should do, knowing that the materials would fetch a high price at the guild, as she could roughly estimate more than 10 million yen just for the materials in that one barrel. She finally spoke and said that it was impossible, making Yue wonder if that meant she didn't want the materials. However, the secretary quickly corrected herself and said that her words didn't mean that she was going to break their agreement. Instead, such a huge amount of gold could empty the town's savings and tax. Yue looked over to the dark-haired boy, who nodded at her, and let her know to tell the secretary that they could just lend the materials for free and sell them off before paying Mars and the others back. The secretary agreed with the terms, and that was that, sending the 3 of them off after getting the mayor's approval. Mars stared at the paper, which proved the agreement that the mayor and the secretary had with Mars and the others, explaining that they were going to pay with gold or reasonable cooperation within the next 10 years due to their help with gathering up so many materials from the subjugation. The dark-haired boy told Yue that what they had gotten was a good agreement and thanked the girl for her help, and she made sure to tell him to just let her know if there was anything else she could do. He wondered why she had said that and asked if he was being too much on guard or if his face showed any negative emotions. But Yue said that she didn't believe any of that was true. Despite her words, Mars knew that he was a little stressed, because it was known that they had gotten themselves into an interesting situation. How all three of them had gotten the city tied up due to all of their actions. The faraway blue dungeon was close to the survivor village, the hidden den of the werewolves, which meant that the village was likely not in good condition. He knew that materials would be needed to restore the village, and it was possible to get said materials from the Kanui. However, Mars was aware that procuring too many materials to restore the village would cause them to become suspicious. Mars wanted to build an equal relationship between the humans and werewolves, along with building a good relationship between him and the citizens of Kanui, so it would be better to not hide anything from the start. The dark-haired boy finally spoke after thinking about it, explaining that they could still just procure materials through the mayor as their cover, and keep the news from getting out to the public. He stood up and grabbed the werewolf girl's attention in order to ask Shizuku if she was okay with that, which caused her to stay silent for a moment before saying that she didn't mind. Shizuku told Mars that he didn't let people die or steal someone a lot of power, so she was sure that Mars's method was the only way that could work. Mars turned toward Yue, who nodded at him, as it was time for them to set off for the next step in their journey. If the demi-human race who lost the war was also the deprived one, then Mars was going to do what he could to help them, and off the three went to go clear the faraway blue dungeon. Someone was struggling to keep their eyes open, calling out to Shizuku and asking where the short werewolf girl was. The surroundings of this person showed that the environment was completely destroyed and had a blazing flame that consumed the village. This person's identity was not known, but they called Shizuku their daughter and indirectly told the girl to not come back to the village as the faraway blue was controlled by the enemy's will. They didn't want to die, as they felt as though they couldn't afford to die just yet, as this person knew that they still hadn't told Shizuku the name of the devourer. Mars and the others were currently walking through the forest as Shizuku was in front of the two, leading the way to the den since she was the only one who knew its location. Mars only knew information about the werewolves from tales and legends, and decided that this was a good opportunity to ask the girl about the history of werewolves, to which she proceeded to do so and relay what her mother and father had taught her. A long time ago, werewolves were driven out by the war against the humans, which caused them to flee into the forest. Males, the elderly, and the sickly were all killed in the battle, while the ones who fled were women and children along with the other tribes who could not fight. The werewolves could only live in the land that they chose, the mountain, as it was far away from the humans, and Shizuku said that the other werewolves who remained were her grandfather and a few relatives. Mars was starting to understand everything more clearly. Remembering that all of them were the ones who possessed the endemic skill Armor of the Fanged Wolf, and found a good amount of meaning in the land that they lived in, even more than what they felt in their hometown. Shizuku continued her story and said that their powers had started to weaken when the forests were disappearing due to the greed of the hunters, who had wanted to tear down the nature around them and either build more industrialization or to proceed to completely neglect the effort that they had put in. After the forests started to get torn down, the werewolves ran and ran. All of them ultimately settled in the valley that humans could not enter even if they wanted to, and the werewolves could live quietly in the part that had forest left, and that was the history of the Hidden Wolf village. As the three of them were walking through the forest, Mars was starting to get to know the terrain, except he noticed that the rocks started to become brittle around them and the dry soil full of sand, as the climate had an extreme difference in temperature than what was usually seen in most parts of the world. The living area of the werewolves was a very harsh environment, which Mars started to realize due to heavy breaths coming from all three of them during their trek toward the den. He turned toward Yue and asked if she was okay, but there was no problem that the girl said to be apparent, and they continued to follow Shizuku through the forest as the temperature started to rise. In Mars's mind, it was true that no one would imagine that the demi-humans had been living in secret in this kind of place for 3 generations, let alone the existence of an S-rank dungeon. Shizuku spoke once more and mentioned to Mars that the dungeon was a dangerous place, despite the werewolves still continuing to get meat and materials from there. They had been entering the shallow depths of the faraway blue while having casualties and had been doing whatever they could just to survive, even if they had to drink monster blood. Shizuku stopped walking and stared off into the distance at the nearby village, while the wind flowed around them. But something seemed off. Mars noticed this and activated his god's eyes in order to take a closer look at what was happening at the village, telling Shizuku that there seemed to be smoke, and how it didn't seem to be coming from cooking or a careless mistake. However, despite Mars's calm attitude, Shizuku immediately broke out into concern as she explained that creating smoke was forbidden in the village, and started to shake and sweat in fear and worry, believing that something must have happened. Mars immediately grabbed the waist and shoulder of both girls and activated his spatial leap skill to teleport the three of them right above the town to witness it already burning down. As Shizuku stared with horror while the three of them wondered what was going on, Mars asked the werewolf girl which one was her house, to which she pointed to a certain one and started to reach out toward her house and squirm in Mars's arm. However, he told the girl to stop moving, as he was going to try and help the situation faster. He activated his Asura's 6 arms skill and landed on the ground while 2 of the arms continued to hold Shizuku and Yue. Mars punched through all of the bug-like monsters that were spread across the village. Nothing stopped the dark-haired boy in his path as he killed all of the monsters on the way to Shizuku's house. And Yue turned toward the boy to ask if he was hurt, but he shouted that he was fine, and that they had almost arrived at their destination. Shizuku saw the monsters that were closing in on her house, which enraged her and caused her to charge out of Mars's arms, activating her Armor of the Fanged Wolf skill while yelling at the monsters to get away from her house, before proceeding to tear the monsters apart with her hands and enter the house with a worried expression. The werewolf girl found her parents on the ground, unconscious and singed, as she yelled at Mars that they weren't breathing and were severely burned. Mars knew that the house was not safe and that they should carry her parents outside before he would heal them, as he would use his Seraph's Blessing skill, the same skill that he used on Garen from before. The burns on her parents' skin started to slowly fade away and were now okay. Despite still being unconscious due to inhaling too much smoke. Shizuku grabbed the hand of one of her parents and brought it to her face, chanting thanks directed towards Mars as she started to cry in joy about her parents being alive. Mars stayed silent for a moment while looking around the village, still wondering what was happening. The strong preyed on the weak to become stronger, while the weak were preyed on and would become weaker. Such were the laws of nature. However, in order to go against such nature, people would seek wisdom and create civilization and culture. But what was unfolding in front of Mars? The ones who were once robbed of everything were not even being allowed to stand up against the dungeon's disasters. Stripped of their land, families, and dignity, and now their lives were being taken away. In the end, nothing had changed in society, and all people could do was ignore their will, build a society, and select a king. If humans only did that, what were the werewolves and other species there for? Yue interrupted Mars's thoughts and asked if they should save the residents first. But Mars said that they should focus on eliminating the boss in the deepest part of the dungeon in order to stop the flow of all the monsters in the area. He asked Shizuku if she was able to protect the residents of the village by herself, to which she hesitated until Mars decided to lend her another skill. The loan process started before the girl could even react, and Mars told her that he was going to give her the Scout's intuition skill so she would be able to detect danger. The werewolf girl was confused as to why he was giving her such a skill when the enemy was right in front of them, but Mars explained that it was for her to run. He wanted her to have the opportunity to be able to run away safely if there was a chance she would ever feel too overwhelmed and could do nothing about things, even if she had to leave all by herself. Shizuku felt offended that he would even offer that, and said that she wouldn't run even if it cost her her life. But while Mars agreed with the mindset of the short werewolf girl, he wanted her to live, as it was in his human nature. Thinking that you win as long as you live was a wild animal's way of thinking, but humans were different. Simply surviving didn't count as living. That's why the situation was just Mars being selfish, and surprisingly enough, Shizuku understood. However, she insisted that there would never be a situation where she would run. Mars told Shizuku that they were going to split up from here on, and him and Yue would defeat the boss and stop the monsters from appearing in the town, while Shizuku would stay there to protect the village. He wanted to ask Shizuku to promise something, but he knew that the werewolf girl would be hesitant in doing so. However, she already knew what he wanted of her and reassured that she wouldn't throw her life away so easily, reaching out with her pinky for the two of them to lock together as a promise. Shizuku was about to tell the two where they needed to go, but Mars said that it was fine and there was no need to, as her priority was to focus on protecting the village, to which she understood. Both of them charged off in their separate directions with their separate tasks, and it was going to be a long time until they were to meet up again. Shizuku proceeded to continue tearing through all of the monsters as Mars asked Yue where the monster's spawning point was. While she clung to the back of the dark-haired boy, he started running up a dirt path, as Yue said that it was likely on the western side of the mountain surface, while the entrance of the faraway blue was likely over there as well, since she was judging from the direction the monsters were moving. However, their journey there was not going to be a peaceful one, and the monsters started to swarm behind them and catch both of their attention. Mars scoffed and immediately killed them with his arm skill with ease, telling them to be gone, as they were only pests in his mission. He hopped away at great speeds and continued along the mountain, noticing how it was easy to cross and was well maintained, which meant that it was likely the path that the werewolf people from the village used to go to the labyrinth. Yue raised her head and stared at the approaching building as Mars said that this was it, the faraway blue, with the monsters pouring out of its entrance without a sign of stopping. Mars started to close in on the dungeon and knew that right at that second, every minute would count, as he told Yue that he was counting on her, to which she affirmed the notion. His skill ender skill activated through Yue herself, as she selected the Obsidian skill from Gordon, and seized it in order to evolve it into Adamantine Barrier, causing it to be a stronger version of the previous skill. Gordon's SP would now then reach the bottom threshold, as the maximum SP would be automatically collected from him here on out, until all of the SP debt was paid off. One of the bug-like monsters charged at Mars, until he immediately activated the Adamantine Barrier skill, which blocked its attack, and sent it flying, before Mars would finish it off by punching it and causing it to explode. It was pointless for any of the monsters to attack him, as the Adamantine Barrier skill was heavier than lead, and would repel any kind of attack and be unshaken by any heavy blow. By combining the characteristics of being heavy and hard with rushing power, a shield could become a cannon. More and more monsters continued to fly or crawl toward the dark-haired boy and Yue, as Mars activated the full power of his Azura's 6 Arms skill, creating what was known as the Great Ram. With one swift move, Mars had darted through all of the monsters without a sweat, and killed every single one of them, slicing through them as he flew through the entrance of the dungeon, while telling Yue that they were going to conquer the dungeon in one fell swoop. To which she agreed, without a doubt in her mind. War was known as a competition for survival. Even if a person were to put various pretexts, the true essence of war was a fight to leave more offspring rather than securing one's own living space. It was natural for the winner of the battle to seize, while the loser was to be seized. On the first floor of the faraway blue, Mars and Yue ran through the hall together while killing off any stray monsters. Mars's mind raced with thoughts about the reasons why humans created culture and civilization, and how he thought it was because they wanted to stray away from war. He knew humans were special and unique, and were different from beasts due to creating civilization and defying the laws of nature. That was what made humans human. But if doing so made things lead to war and the strong preying on the weak, then just what was the reason civilization was made? What was the reason countries and societies were made? The two of them ran down more stairs to the lower levels of the dungeon, until they arrived at the 4th floor of the faraway blue. And Mars stopped in place and raised an arm as a signal for Yue to stop as well. He told her that they were going to pause for a moment until he would figure out what the next step in their plan would be, since all that filled the 4th floor of the dungeon was a sea horizon that crashed against the sand. It was almost ridiculous, but Mars saw how it seemed as though anything really could go into an S-rank dungeon. Yue stared at the moving waves, tilting her head in confusion and interest until she would kneel down near it and cup some of the water in her hands, in order to bring some to her mouth to drink. This action had alarmed Mars and made him almost scared as he called for her attention. But there was nothing to worry about, since she turned around to explain that it seemed to be non-toxic fresh water with quality the same as spring water. Mars had an exhausted expression while staring at the girl, accepting the new information despite the fact that his heart had skipped a beat. He told her to not do things like that without thinking about it, since they didn't know what was in the labyrinth water, so he healed her in advance just in case there was anything secretly bad within it. They both stared once again at the large body of water, as Mars told Yue that dungeons would always bring something new and unexpected. There were reports from adventurers who saw scenery in an A-rank dungeon and the sky in an S-rank dungeon. Each dungeon was incredibly diverse and went beyond one's imagination, and from Mars' guesses, the faraway blue dungeon was one of ocean and water. Yue asked if they should cross using spatial jump, but Mars explained that it was not possible since the lake stretched far into the distance. And in addition to that, there were swarms of bees from above, and inside the lake, a large amount of sea serpents. The water splashed all around as large snake-like beasts sprouted from the lake, as Mars knew that it would take a while if he had to jump many times using his skill, while trying to avoid the monsters. Yue asked him what they were supposed to do next, and he was left in thought for a moment, before he decided that they should cross using a ship and used his Cocytus skill to create a boat made out of ice. They carefully stepped into it and Mars activated the adamantine barrier around the boat before setting sail as the serpents swiftly charged at the two of them. His next skill to activate was Songs of the Divine Sea, in order to search for past magic, and find the direction that he would need to sail towards, before using other skills to use wind magic to send the boat speeding through the water. Serpents and bees started to come after them once more, making Yue worry and tell Mars about the situation. But he wasn't worried whatsoever. as he would use more skills and overlap them to create a boat that sped faster, while the very wind behind them would slice through any monsters that would come near. Mars told Yue that he would use his Great Ram skill with floors that had land, and Argo with floors that had water, which was the best way to proceed without any delay and speedrun to the bottom floor. Meanwhile, in the Hidden Wolf Village, Shizuku's parents would slowly wake from their unconsciousness, as Shizuku's father removed the covers from himself and sat up, staring at his body in confusion as he wondered what was happening before that. He remembered how the house was attacked by monsters which he defeated, until the house was soon consumed by fire and caused him and his wife to fall unconscious due to inhaling too much smoke. The werewolf man stared down at Shizuku's mother before looking at his hand, and was confused once again at the fact that they had both survived, and had their injuries healed, noticing that the building they were both in was not his house. He got up and walked outside to look around, only to realize that his daughter was outside and fighting the monsters valiantly, before she turned around at the sound of her father calling out for her. The girl stared happily when she realized that he had awoken. Her father asked the girl how she was using her Armor of the Fanged Wolf skill for longer than 10 seconds, and she mentioned that there was a person who lent her their power in order to utilize such a skill in battle. Shizuku continued speaking excitedly about this same person, and how they were on their way to stop the monsters in the dungeon, but her father interrupted her with a cry of worry and a darkness falling over his face. While clenching his fist tightly, he said that there was a very powerful enemy in the faraway blue dungeon, but his daughter tried to reassure him that there was no need to worry since the person she knew was able to defeat hundreds of thousands of monsters. However, her father cut her off once again and explained that there was an enemy of their people in there, and was the one who released the monsters outside. Shizuku was confused on who her father was talking about, until he finally let the short werewolf know that their enemy was Duke Abik. Mars asked Yue what was the shortest estimated time for the two of them to reach the bottom, and she said that it was likely around 30 minutes. This information did not make Mars content. Instead, he felt as though the dungeon was taking so much time and that they needed to hurry, since they were about to reach the general room which held the mini-boss of the dungeon. Using his Asura's 6 arms skill, him and Yue would leap through the air at high speeds, until Mars would notice something up ahead, and stop their progression in order to hide behind a rock. Yue was confused until he told her to be quiet, as there were other humans in the dungeon, a group of 4 who had a familiar family crest on their shoulders. This crest meant that the people of this group were affiliated with the Ducal Abik family. However, Mars was confused because no one was supposed to know about this dungeon, let alone soldiers from the Ducal Abik family. Suddenly, one of the group members had noticed the presence of Mars and Yue and whipped his body around in order to call out to both of them to come out of hiding. They both did so without hesitation, and the 4 were very confused. And the same man who previously called out to the two of them had asked them if they were with the guild, and to tell them their name and affiliation. Mars answered honestly and said that he was a former guild member, and this man recognized the name as Mars used to be a part of Sword of Divine Silver, even if Mars left it 3 weeks ago. However, everyone in the group did not seem to know that Mars had left, and burst out into a maniacal laughter, which made the dark-haired boy notice that it seemed as though the reputation of his ex-party had fallen low. He was told that Ultra had exposed himself to a great deal of shame in front of the Duke a few days ago, but Mars didn't care at all, and wondered why he was being told that. To which the swordsman said that the group had decided to conquer the dungeon on behalf of the weak and frail guild that Mars's ex-party was a part of. Mars realized that the word choice meant that they were at this dungeon of their own volition, rather than being there under the Duke's orders. The dark-haired boy hummed in thought, but the swordsman continued to talk and said that Mars shouldn't underestimate S-rank dungeons if he was there to restore his honor, which confirmed Mars's suspicions on the people of this group not knowing that he had left the party a while ago. Mars asked if they hadn't informed the Duke, which was confirmed since the swordsman already had the intention of defeating it before pretending that his story was that the monster tidal wave happened and needed to be dealt with. This meant that Duke Abik didn't know about the Hidden Wolf Village yet, so Mars planned to capture these soldiers and steal their memories after conquering the dungeon. Yue grabbed her necklace and felt that Shizuku was waiting for their return, and the two of them tried to continue. However, the swordsman told them to stand down and tried to grab at Yue as a threat, but Mars pushed her out of the way just in time. She was safe, but the man had ripped off her necklace and tossed it into a nearby puddle of mud. He tried to pretend that his hand had slipped, even if it was obvious what he had done, and said that Mars and Yue should hurry up to find it before the pendant was lost forever. The group of soldiers soon walked off with the confidence that they were supposedly more competent than Mars was. And once they were gone, Yue apologized and said that he should go ahead while she searched for the necklace. He said that didn't need to happen and they can find it together, as he reminded her that the jewels of these pendants were extremely important to werewolves, as speedrunning the dungeon was not their only objective, it was also to save the werewolves. Mars told Yue that they could find the pendant while the 4 soldiers would fight against the general in the meantime. since the two of them should find the pendant before it sank any deeper in the mud. Yue smiled and happily agreed. And just before the soldiers had passed through the door to the mini-boss, the swordsman gave one last laugh due to not expecting to meet a person from the Sword of Divine Silver. After a good while of searching, they had finally found the pendant and Yue thanked her master happily. There was no dirt on either of the two as Mars had removed it using his polishing skill, and he was glad that the girl looked relieved after finding the pendant again. It was now time to go check on the 4 soldiers and see how they were doing, and Mars raised an arm to use a skill to check to see what was inside without having to enter it just yet. Remembering how the group were so confident about their skills, which meant that they should be killing the general by now. However, all that Mars could sense was that there was one snare snail inside that was completely unhurt, despite all the time that had passed. Yue pulled at the cloak of Mars in order to get his attention and told him to look on the ground, as it was seen that there was blood flowing out from the bottom of the doors, making the dark-haired boy confirm that the soldiers did not have a good time in there, and it meant that they needed to take things into their own hands. He opened the door and was immediately attacked, but repelled it using his subspace rupture skill to slice up the incoming tentacles. Mars looked around and saw that 3 of the members were dead, and found the girl sitting in a corner in the dark space of the room as she was trying to hide from the snail, stuck in a fetal position with her body shaking violently in fear, and chanting that divine punishment had befallen them. He asked the girl what she meant, but she was too busy being scared by his presence and asking for help, to which he said he would give it to her if she would answer his question truthfully. His question was what the group did, and the girl explained that the leader of the group led the monsters outside by using a pungent medicine. Mars knew that acting by oneself was subject to punishment in the military and would need a person to provide proof of reason to avoid said punishment, which seemed to be what the swordsman was doing. It didn't matter what the circumstances were of these soldiers, as Mars knew that the important part of the story was the fact that the monsters were released intentionally. Despite all this, he dismissed his thoughts for a later time, as he needed to get to the boss as soon as possible, and told the two to not move from where they were. Mars walked up to the large snail monster and used his Cocytus skill to try and freeze it, but it was not too affected due to its high defense. Yue tried to tell him that he would be able to attack it from the inside, but his objective was not to defeat the general, it was to conquer the dungeon as fast as possible. He called it lucky to have met this general, leaving the 2 girls confused by his words until he used his spatial leap to fly up into the air with the monster. Mars told them to close their eyes and cover their ears, before he would send the giant snail crashing through the ground, which confused the girl as Yue explained that he was trying to create a hole to directly go to the lower floors. A goal at which he succeeded, as it seemed as though he managed to break down to the 14th floor. Despite getting to the next floor with ease by using this very new trick, Mars was still not done, and he was planning to do it many more times, raising the snail and sending it through the floor once again and into the 15th floor. And then again, and again. The snail's body would be sent all the way to the ceiling of the floor that Yue and the girl were on, before being sent back down to the next floor to be broken through. This girl was in absolute shock to find out that the floors of a dungeon could actually be destroyed. And Mars told her that it was true that every adventurer had the same thought at least once of wanting to dig directly down from the first floor to the bottommost floor. However, no one had actually succeeded in destroying the floor, which made people reach the conclusion that the dungeon floors were unbreakable. She was still confused as to how Mars was able to pull off such a feat, especially when he was supposedly a porter in the Sword of Divine Silver party. But Yue was standing next to the girl with a sudden dark aura because of her words, which made the girl apologize. Yue calmed down and let the girl know that Mars had already left the party a while ago, and while it was fine to listen to rumors, it is best in the end for a person to decide the truth with their own eyes and thinking. Mars finally broke through to the 20th floor, but he still wasn't done. He would break, and break, and break, until the only thing that would break was the snail itself. He was surprised and almost impressed that the snail had broken into pieces, but this was a good sign, as it meant the floor that they were on was particularly special, and couldn't be broken through. Considering the number of floors that Mars had destroyed, the very next floor was likely the last floor of the dungeon. The girl mentioned how it had become quiet, and Yue had wondered if Mars had went so deep that they couldn't even hear the sound anymore. But the dark-haired boy soon flew back up to gather the 2 girls. He told them that he had finally reached the bottom of the S-rank dungeon and it was time for them to beat the boss and conquer it. However, the girl from the group of soldiers had collapsed to the ground once more, catching the attention of and confusing Mars and Yue for the behavior. Mars asked what was wrong as Yue outstretched a hand for the girl to grab, but she refused to move as she started to shake in fear once again, saying that humans couldn't run on water nor could fly in the sky, and how destroying a dungeon floor or beating an S-rank dungeon should also be impossible for humans to achieve. Yue asked for the name of the girl, who finally introduced herself as Marrow Brand. and Yue quickly corrected Mero that humans could in fact run on water if they could put their left foot forward before their right foot would sink. This response puzzled Mero, as she said that was practically impossible, and Yue responded that that was true, but it was not actually impossible. Practically impossible and actually impossible were two different things, and this time, what Mars had achieved was practically impossible. He told Yue that it was time for them to go, and the two of them had left the girl to sit there while they would jump down into the bottommost floor of the dungeon, while bringing down one of the parts of the broken giant snail. They landed without problem and walked forward to meet face to face with a giant frog on top of a pyramid-like pedestal, only for the monster to croak in anger at the presence of the two. Mars saw how the frog was not able to completely hide its agitation and asked the monster if it was not expecting an enemy to come from above, since adventurers would normally come through a door at the end of the stairs in between each floor. Despite all that, Mars proceeded to freeze the broken part of the giant snail, and told the frog that he had no time to play with it, as he had a friend waiting for his return while fighting to protect her village. The frog attempted to whip its tongue toward Mars and Yue, but the dark-haired boy was faster, and sent the icicle flying toward the boss and instantly killed it, as the icicle stabbed through the frog's head. And with that, the battle ended in seconds. In the hidden werewolf village, Shizuku was still trying to fight off all of the monsters in the village, but she was starting to get exhausted and heaved for breath while bruises lined her short body. She looked up with her mouth agape as she was astonished by the size of a large mantis-like monster that stood before her, towering over her and the rest of the village that was still in flames. The werewolf girl glanced at her claws and believed that she needed to push harder in order to protect her home, and called for more power from her armor of the Fanged Wolf skill. But even with the increased time from the duration enhancement, the land was telling her that she has reached the limit of mana that she could borrow. However, despite that, she still felt like she had to get back the home that her ancestors had protected. For that, Shizuku planned to kill everything that tried to take it away and wanted to carve a path for her bloodline to live. She shouted to no one in particular that people shouldn't easily say that it was okay to run away, and remembered that she believed the same when hearing these weak words of the people in the town of Kanui. Shizuku remembered all of their words before wanting the thoughts to shut up, as the werewolf angrily charged at the mantis while saying that a person couldn't call themselves a human just because they were still breathing. Mars knew this, yet he still told Shizuku to escape and save herself. She saw him as a person who was stronger than anyone she knew, so she was sure that he would conquer the faraway blue, giving her the motivation and drive to push herself to her utmost limit when protecting the place that she called home. Shizuku was almost out of strength, but she would hold out until Mars came back, and ran up the side of a nearby building before leaping off of it and dodging the swing of the mantis and decapitating the large monster with her claws. The werewolf girl would crash to the ground and slowly get up, her body violently shaking due to exhaustion, as she celebrated to herself that she had finished the long battle. This mantis was something she believed to be similar to the general of the dungeon, but her cheers were interrupted by the scout's intuition, which warned her about more monsters, hundreds of mantises who were soon closing in on the village. There were too many of them for her to fight, and she was already at her limit, which her father had noticed, as he told her that she should pull back, as she had done enough. But Shizuku had noticed a great power being sensed that wasn't coming from the enemy, and told her father to not worry. And she was right. Mars and Yue, along with the girl they had found, had charged through all of the mantises using the Great Ram skill, and landed near where Shizuku was. The werewolf girl would look up with awe as she saw at that moment how Mars's back looked so big. As the dust slowly blew away, the dark-haired adventurer said that he was going to handle it from here, but Shizuku was confused and more focused on asking about the dungeon, to which he immediately responded that he had conquered it. According to his god's eye, the only remaining monsters were the ones in the village and the ones around the nearby valley, but he was not going to let even a single one get away. He asked the girl if all of the villagers from the Hidden Wolf village were in the back and away from the battle, which she confirmed without hesitation since it was previously confirmed by her own father, so there wouldn't be any problems for Mars when he would kill the rest of the monsters. Mars told Shizuku that he was glad she made it easy to understand, and told everyone around him to get down, as he proceeded to raise his arm and activate his storm wind technique, Aeolus. A whirlwind had appeared in the air, circling around the dark-haired boy, as all of the monsters had started to get sucked toward the powerful whirlwind with no way of escaping. Thousands of monsters squeaked and croaked in confusion and fear as they were being thrown around at high speeds, and Shizuku was amazed by how everything was being sent flying upwards. He would soon use and combine both Spatial Rupture and Cocytus to create a cutting ice blade that sliced through each and every monster all at once within seconds. All that seemed to be left in the sky were small, broken pieces of ice that shined brightly, and everyone in the village, including Yue and Shizuku, looked with awestruck expressions. At that moment, the frozen remains of all the monsters, while reflecting in the sun's light, fell upon the mountains, as if marking the end of this disaster. After the long and hard battle and putting out the fire of the hidden wolf village, Mars and Yue sat down on pillows, while the rest of the village had all sat down in front of the two and bowed down with respect and thankfulness. The parents of Shizuku thanked Mars and Yue for saving their daughter and their village, and introduced themselves as Asagi, the village chief, and Kasumi. Asagi was apologetic and told them that they could not prepare anything as a gift, and wanted to do as much as he could for Mars and Yue, and Mars responded by thanking the Wolfman for having them during such a difficult time. Shizuku's father suddenly said that if Mars wished for a concubine, he could have Shizuku herself, which confused and alarmed both the werewolf girl and Mars. The dark-haired boy said that would be a bit too much, and Asagi understood, seeing how Shizuku did not seem to agree, and Mars tried to say that Shizuku was a noble lady of the werewolf tribe. Asagi did say that he had royal blood in him, but his qualities of a king caused him to supposedly not be able to call Shizuku a princess. Hearing this made Mars ask to hear more details about the story related to the village's reconstruction, to which Shizuku's father explained that the werewolf tribe used to have a king too. However, the vacancy continued, since a symbol was lost in the wartime fire, even if that very tradition might be ending that day as well. Mars was confused and asked what Asagi meant, to which the werewolf man pointed at the necklaces that both Mars and Yue wore, explaining that the jewels were the very symbol that had returned to their people. It was called the Queen's Jewel, but the meaning of the necklaces was an indication of the three people that were meant to be on the throne: the king, his spouse, and his heir. These three people would each hold one of the jewels and pass them on through the generations. Asagi and Kasumi were worried that the jewels had been lost somewhere in the valley, but it was fortunate that they were somewhere safe. The werewolf man proceeded to pick up a sword that he had kept next to him the entire time, which caught Mars's attention as Asagi started to unsheath it, claiming that the sword was also to be held by the one on the throne and was called a katana. A blacksmith dwarf used to live with them on the land, and the sword was forged by that same dwarf's ancestor, to which Mars observed the sword closely, noticing the slight curve and how easy it was to tell that it was not forged by any human. The jewels and the sword together in Mars's possession would prove to earn him the right to become the king of the forest. But when Mars heard this, he was about to give his jewel to Asagi, while Yue would try to give hers to Kasumi. However, Asagi would raise a hand as a signal to stop them, as he would explain that Shizuku had told them that he had traveled with no destination, and if they were looking for a place to settle, he could become their king. All the werewolves stared intensely at Mars and Yue, awaiting a response from the dark-haired boy, and after some silence, he had finally spoke, and told Asagi that his thoughts might be unclear after almost losing his family, along with the fact that Mars hadn't even stayed in the village for more than a day. He told them that the answer was no, but Asagi still tried to get through to Mars by asking if he knew about the law of the werewolf tribe. It was that one should use their strength not for themselves, but for others, which Mars knew as that was what he heard from Shizuku. Asagi explained that while Mars possessed great strength, he still used it for the sake of the werewolves, and even returned the jewels to them without a moment of hesitation. The werewolf man raised his hand as a signal, and each and every one of the demi-human people in that room had immediately bowed once again, surprising Mars and Yue by the action. Asagi continued his response as he said that werewolves bowed to the strong, and above all, the proud, no matter the race nor age, as it was their true wish to have the strongest in the lands as their king. Mars started to realize that he seemed to have misunderstood werewolves, as he learned that it was their law to make the best warrior their king. Asagi pleaded for Mars to take the sword, and let them be able to hunt beasts, plow the earth, and fight for Mars, while the dark-haired boy would let his journey have an ending in their village. Mars knew it was true that his journey had no destination, nor was there harm in accepting the offer, but Yue stopped him from accepting the sword, and reminded him that she wanted him to choose the path that he could truly accept. He decided to reject the offer, and said that there was one thing he wanted to ask the werewolves, going outside to a cage that held marrow inside. Mars explained to everyone that she was someone hiding in the dungeon and was part of the group that drove the monsters out of the dungeon for their own personal greed, to which the girl would confirm and cause the werewolves around to stare with shock and anger. They started to argue about how to punish her, everyone giving different suggestions that all had consequences to them, until they had all settled on the punishment being to kill Marrow, out of their pain and anger of what happened to their village and people. One of the people walked up to the cage holding a dead child, as they asked why the woman had to still be alive while the child wasn't, and begged for her to give him back. Mero looked down with sadness and shame, as she was about to say that she couldn't do that. But her words were interrupted by a voice calling out to the girl and asking her what she would do if she could. She was surprised by the presence of his voice and wondered where it was coming from, until Mars had explained to her that he was able to talk to her by blowing the air with his voice's vibrations using his spatial jump skill, to let no one except for her hear it. Pushing that aside, Mars immediately went back on topic, and asked if she would revive the child after he lent her the healing skill Blessing of the Seraph, while losing two things: her skill and her lifespan. There was no knowing how many years or decades the lost lifespan would be, and it would have been possible for Tina to safely use it when combined with other skills. But Tina did not even bring herself to use it once either. Mars asked Mero once again if she would accept the offer and do something, instead of simply atoning for her sins despite how it may have a chance of resulting in death. But Mero finally spoke and agreed to do it. After hearing this, Mars nodded and told all of the werewolves to listen to the idea he had. And soon enough, Mero had used the borrowed skill to revive the child. The girl heaved for breaths and asked if there was anyone else that had passed away. But the only person who had died was the child. However, everyone was still conflicted on what to do with Mero now. She returned the damage that she did, but it didn't make the crime itself disappear, as her punishment was still yet to be decided. Suddenly, Shizuku walked into the frame, and said that none of them had listened to Mero's story. One of the werewolves had tried to explain that it would be unlikely for them to tolerate the answer after what she had done, but Shizuku insisted that it was up to Mero to talk her way out of this, as it was no justice to decide without letting Mero say anything. The demi-human stood around the cage as the girl groveled and begged that they would let her use the healing skill to heal and revive her comrades, as she had fought alongside them for 6 years, even if they had done something unforgivable. Mars couldn't help but be reminded of his own past and the people he had fought with as well, and the girl continued and explained that she was going to persuade her comrades and be of use, while doing her best to negotiate with the Duke. Shizuku looked intently into her eyes and asked if she was going to do this even if it meant her life, to which Mero confirmed without hesitation. Not allowing a person to save someone who could be saved was the same as killing them, and Shizuku decided that she was satisfied with what she had heard from the girl, turning around to ask everyone if they were satisfied as well. Even if they were to punish Mero severely, it wouldn't change anything, so they were going to keep the girl and her party as a pointed duty of collecting resources from the faraway blue dungeon before they were eventually allowed back one day to conduct negotiations with the hidden wolf village. Mars watched everything play out, until he was then offered the sword once again, thinking about it for a moment before accepting the offer after all, and saying that he would become the king of the deprived and take back what was stolen in order to carve out a new future, to which all of the werewolves bowed down to Mars once again and agreed to follow him on that path. The next day, Mero walked off into the forest and was ready to go somewhere, until Yue immediately noticed and asked where she was going. It seemed as though Yue had unlocked the door for her and Mero was trying to get far away before anyone noticed. However, Yue mentioned that Mero's escape was already anticipated due to the strong sense of smell and hearing from the werewolves. With this in mind, along with the fact that no one was coming to stop her from escaping, it all meant something. Yue gave the girl a gift which held a piece of Ritra that Mero would be able to use and process into a medicine, to give back the lifespan that she had lost, as long as she headed to a town of scholars far west from there. Mero was confused as to why she was given such an important item, but instead, Yue had a message for the girl from Mars, and it was that the Sword of Divine Silver was truly third-rate. With this, Mero would soon set off for her journey, her last words being that Yue would tell Mars that she would give her gratitude the next time they would ever meet. Mars, Yue, and Shizuku set off on their own journey. However, they immediately stumbled upon a large stone golem with a gem in the center of its chest. Yue asked what a golem was, and Mars would explain that it was a mud doll made only by a pioneer alchemist, by breathing life into the dirt with its size depending on the caster's skill. She wondered if it was searching for something, and Shizuku worriedly asked what they should do, to which Mars told the werewolf girl to head to the village and take everyone to a safe place. Mars was not going to let this golem go any further. However, his thoughts were quickly interrupted by a woman asking if he was the skill lender, and how she had been looking for him, and she introduced herself as Angelina the Alchemist. 2 months before she had met Mars, Angelina had arrived at the guild and was spontaneously greeted by Ultra and Elia, who had made a celebration for her arrival, to welcome the girl into the Sword of Divine Silver. Angelina reluctantly thanked them for their actions, but was confused about why there were only 2 of them, and also wondered where the skill lender was. Elia, while stuffing her mouth with food, asked Angelina what alchemy was,
causing the girl to get excited and start rambling about what alchemy was. Alchemy was the magic of making the impossible possible. However, that was only the case when the alchemists would have to go through a continuous struggle against one failure after another. Despite that, that was what made alchemy interesting to Angelina, as she dreamed of finding something that she couldn't do even using a golem. Both Ultra and Elia agreed about how dreams were important, and Ultra was about to talk about the terms of the party until Angelina immediately started to walk away, as she wasn't interested anymore. The long-haired swordsman was confused and tried to stop her, which only made Angelina herself confused, and Ultra was about to ask why the alchemist girl was about to leave, until he was cut off when he looked down and noticed something. Angelina turned her body away with a flustered and upset expression, as Ultra tried to make an excuse that he was looking down because of the height difference. She brought the topic back and explained that she came because she had business with Mars, the skill lender. But Ultra tried to say that there was no use for a guy like that, and said that Ultra himself was all the party needed. Angelina sighed deeply and said she wasn't interested in that, and asked if the swordsman didn't understand the skill lender's value. She said that if she were able to combine forces with Mars, their synergy would prove to be powerful, and make them able to do almost anything. And Angelina had traveled a great distance to seek something they both couldn't do alone. Ultra still tried to get her to stay, but the girl knew that there was no use in joining a party that stopped functioning a while ago. Angelina thought about Ultra's words for a second and figured out an idea, saying that things would be decided by playing a game. They both walked outside the guild and people started to crowd around them in anticipation, wanting to know what would play out. The alchemist girl explained that this would be a one-on-one match between them both, to which Ultra stubbornly agreed to even if he knew on the inside that things would go bad. But he felt as though he had no other choice but to accept. The girl kneeled down on the ground, and believed that it was time to start the battle, placing her hands flat onto the dirt and quickly activating her Earth Golem skill.
After Angelina put her hands to the ground and activated her Golem skill, small debris flew everywhere, and the dirt obscured Ultra's vision from the being behind the clouds. Two glowing eyes pierced through the dust with an intimidating aura, before seemingly sprouting and rising from the ground, causing Ultra to lean back with shock and fear until that expression soon turned into confusion, as he blankly stared at the anticlimactic situation in front of him. The girl stood proudly as the dirt blew away and revealed a tiny golem, barely even a foot tall, while the long-haired knight stared with almost disappointment. Angelina looked down at the golem and called it handsome, saying that if it were ever reborn as a human one day, it would be her husband. Ultra looked down and raised an eyebrow, inspecting the golem while asking if it was just that tiny thing that he was going to be fighting. But the word choice offended Angelina, as she said that the golem was her future husband. She explained that even if it were temporary, golems were alive too, and that she was sure it would be reborn as a human one day so they could marry. Ultra said that he imagined that the golems would burst out everywhere, and felt overconfident that the battle would be easy against this one small golem. But Angelina just smiled and waited for Elia to give the signal, to which the witch girl, who was stuffing her face with food, proceeded to raise the meat stick and bring it down as if it were a flag, to signal the start of the battle. Ultra immediately charged forward with a determined smile, believing that the golem would move slowly due to its species. But Angelina told the boy that he should know better than to trust conventional thinking. She activated a jump skill on the golem and caused it to suddenly disappear in Ultra's eyes, making him stop and whip his head around in shock until the girl pointed to the sky. He looked up with confusion and held a dumbstruck expression as he witnessed the golem coming down from the sky, causing Ultra to have to barely leap out of the way, as the tiny golem smashed into the ground with a huge force. The Nightman stared with shock, his mouth agape as the alchemist girl explained to him that golems had a unique thing about them, where they were able to reflect the skills of the caster, causing Ultra to stare in more disbelief about how golems could use skills. Angelina told him that they were going to keep going and she activated the jump skill once again. But this time, Ultra seemed to have gained confidence once more, as he stood up and said that things would be easy now that he knew the golem's tricks. Ultra was about to activate his Sword Saint skill, until he was interrupted by something sprouting from the ground and grabbing his legs to hold him in place. He was confused as Angelina counted down the seconds before the tiny golem smashed into his back. Angelina stood over him with a sickeningly sweet smile, as she asked him if he was going to surrender, but he was too stubborn and said that he wouldn't surrender to someone in love with a golem. These words only upset the girl as she reactivated her Earth Golem skill and summoned more golems to start surrounding the area, explaining to Ultra that she could make everything crawl with golems, while also imparting her skills to every single one of them. She smiled evilly, asking if it was tragic for him to be beaten by a plain girl not loved by humans, but Ultra tried to say that he never called her that. Angelina just responded by activating her jump skill on the golems again and continuing to beat up the male. Once she inevitably won, Ultra laid under the weight of the golems, his body twitching as Angelina walked over to Elia and started to vent about how she had issues with finding a husband. Elia tried to reassure Angelina that she shouldn't worry, since she would eventually meet someone one day. Suddenly, Angelina remembered something that she wanted to request of Elia. The next day, morning came and Ultra awaked with a shout. Elia greeted him casually, and complained to Ultra about how it was heavy labor for her to have carried him to the inn, and even needed help from the townspeople. The long-haired knight asked where Angelina went, only to hear that the girl had just left town, making Ultra grab at his hair in frustration about how their chances of getting promoted was ruined. He then looked at the corner of the room and noticed that the luggage of Mars that they had Gordon collect from the Devil's Abyss was gone. Ultra asked where it had gone, and Elia casually said that Angelina requested it, and she handed it over without hesitation because they were friends who ate from the same plate. Ultra wondered why Angelina would want something like Mars's equipment, but Elia explained that Angelina said she had the ability to find Mars with golems that specialized in scent. She was shocked to hear this information and told the witch girl to get ready to head to the bell tower, since they were going to find Angelina. They made their way to the top of the tower and looked down upon the city, looking over to scan and search for the alchemist girl, and Elia caught Ultra's attention as she told him that she had found Angelina already on her way to chase after Mars's scent, causing Ultra to grin widely. Meanwhile, Mars was talking to the werewolf people and explained to them how he had an item called Vritra's egg, and how it was placed in the faraway Azur's deepest part, saying that it helped and kept the dungeon stable for the moment. People were shocked and confused as Mars mentioned that Vritra was a dragon serpent that could preserve a dragon with even just its egg, and even after the egg hatches and grows, it'll keep the dungeon replenished. Mars knew that it was one of his goals on his journey to find a place to raise the egg somewhere safe and secure, so it was fortunate for him to have found this village with the nearby dungeon, and believed that the village would thrive alongside the dragon serpent and the faraway Azur, with the first step already having been taken in that direction. The dark-haired male also said that the scale of the dungeon depended on the strength of the dungeon boss. For example, with the former dungeon boss, the limit of the dungeon was only 52 floors, but with Vritra now, Mars believed that it could grow even further. However, it would become impossible for Vritra to coexist with humans and other beings, such as the werewolf people. Mars said that he would take all the responsibility and reconquer the dungeon to prioritize the safety of everyone. He turned toward the group of soldiers from before that they had captured and asked one of them, Berman, about the thing he asked the man to look for, and the group said that they had found it. The father of Shizuku looked into the vase, only to find water inside of it, as he noticed that the quality appeared to be similar to that of the village's water supply. Mars explained that he had people search for it from the first floor of the dungeon, since the water quality there was better than the lake Mars had seen on the 4th floor, and luckily the soldier group had found it not far from the entrance. Shizuku's father was confused and asked Mars why he had gotten people to collect water, since the werewolf people already had water to grow the wheat fields. But Mars interrupted the older man and asked if he knew why the wheat kept dying. The man thought about it for a moment, and figured that it was probably because of the soil's vital minerals for growing wheat being drained away, and the fact that even if they found a method to cultivate a different crop, the soil's fertility would only prolong for a few years. He also remembered that the village had limitations, which meant that it couldn't prepare any fallow soil, and Mars told them that the fertility of the soil was deteriorating, because they were continuing to plant the same crop on the same soil, causing what was called repeated cultivation damage. Mars was curious about the damage, and remembered hearing about a crop that could be cultivated for hundreds of years even on a tiny plot of soil, and that was called the rice crop, a crop grown by planting rice grass in a watered field, since the water replenished the soil and kept it in balance. With this information, Shizuku's father understood the situation and knew that they were going to need a lot of water for it. Mars explained that rice was normally grown on land with a lot of rain and plentiful water, but the village did not have a water source from anywhere other than the dungeon, which was why they needed to preserve the dungeon to fix the water problem. Shizuku's father was surprised at how much Mars had thought of everything, and asked him if he had the seeds for the crop, to which Mars said that he didn't, and proceeded to walk up to the werewolf girl and told Shizuku that he was going to give her his first order for a certain task he had in mind. The werewolf girl went back to Kanui, where Garen sat in his office, and thought that his time was not over. But a man walked in and told Garen that there was a customer. The bald man was confused until Shizuku walked into the building, and caused Garen to almost fall out of his chair in fear while begging and screaming for the girl to not kill him. But Shizuku felt offended and said that she wasn't some monster, proceeding to sit down on a nearby sofa. He was confused, since he thought that she had left Kanui, but she explained that she had just gone out of town for a bit and returned because there were things that she needed him to arrange. Garen wondered why she was asking this, but the girl only said that it was what Mars told her, since he said that Garen refused, no matter what, to give away his money, even when his hand was cut off. The bald man even emphasized that he still wouldn't do that, even at that moment, and asked who in their right mind would do that if they didn't have to which Shizuku said that was the reason why he was going to be the ideal, trustworthy, and reliable supplier for the job. Garen only got upset and called her rude, asking why she thought he would help Mars and the others, but Shizuku asked if Garen forgot. She turned toward the other man, Eldora, and told him to repeat what he said when he attacked Mars, and Eldora muttered about how he told Mars, "I'll plunder everything you have." Shizuku at that time said, "In that case, I'll also take everything you have." To which Eldora responded, "Try it if you can." Garen was almost seething with rage while hearing all of this, but Shizuku said that the bald man couldn't complain since he was there too, and didn't disagree with the choice of words. Despite all of the words exchanged at the battle, Mars still won, and Shizuku explained that they could just take everything they had and leave, but they forgave Garen and would rather just collect it if given the chance. Garen was silent for a moment before gripping Eldora's shirt and yelling at him for what he did, until Shizuku jumped in and told the men that as long as they would cooperate and turn over some of the profits of the money for trade, Mars would continue making the transactions. She did threaten that she would come back again if they did anything crooked, but Garen interrupted and asked for confirmation that this was just going to be another investment. Still a little in disbelief, yet very interested in the fact that he would be gaining profit from the situation. The werewolf girl held out a paper that Garen snatched, that had the list of things for him to arrange and deliver to the mayor, causing Garen to realize that he really couldn't defy them, since the mayor was under their control. Garen fell to the floor in defeat while crying about his business, and Shizuku said that there was one more job she had for him, pulling out a rock that he recognized as divine silver ore, and the werewolf girl explained that he could trade such an ore like that rock with Renono for money. The bald man started to imagine the amount of money that he would make from all this, getting distracted before Shizuku asked him once again if he was going to agree with the deal, to which he immediately and finally did. Shizuku returned to Mars and told him that everything went great, and Mars was happy to hear it, since with the help of everyone's contributions, they would all be able to maximize their profits. The werewolf girl was confused and wondered if they should really let Garen profit too, but he said that it was better to use enemies rather than just killing them. Mars said that all that was left now was to wait for results, and he looked down at the land and how they had dug a waterway from the faraway Azure, and turned the dead wheat fields into paddy fields, while also paving the mountain roads to bring leaf fertilizers and wood from the forest. Little by little, the atmosphere of the village was changing. Shizuku was happy to see everyone working so hard, and said that she would make sure to do her best to do her part as well. Then, after 2.5 months, that was when they encountered the massive earth golem that was easily above 40 meters tall. They met the alchemist, Angelina, who followed them to the village, and she introduced herself while saying that she had been looking forward to meeting him. Angelina jumped off of the golem as Mars introduced himself, and the girl explained that she had come there after hearing things from Ultra. Mars twitched at the sound of Ultra's name, and he asked if she came here to find him upon Ultra's orders, but Angelina quickly corrected that she was there out of her own academic interest toward him. He did remember that Ultra said that he would take in an alchemist to take his place, and wondered if it was this girl. Mars decided to believe that the girl didn't have any ill intent, especially since she made herself known without hiding, and that even if she did hide herself to try and set up an attack, golems couldn't do much without an alchemist's instructions. She was impressed by how much knowledge he had, and proceeded to follow him into the village, where some of the werewolf people ran up to Asagi to tell him about the stone golem in the village. But the old man was not alarmed and told the others that there was nothing to worry about, since he had already consulted with Mars about the problem. Asagi asked about the situation in the village and farm, and learned that everything was going well, to which he told the 2 werewolf men to not let the rivers get out of control, and also figure out a way to pick off the stems, also telling them to go to the village, since Shizuku was gathering everyone there. Shizuku's father grumbled to himself since he felt as though their work was increasing, but there weren't enough workers. But his thoughts were interrupted by Mars walking up and explaining that he was going to make sure that everyone was avoiding starvation with food that he stocked from Kanui. In the not-so-distant future, everyone's hard work was going to bear fruit. Mars told Angelina that he didn't have time right now for her academic interest, but he couldn't let her go due to her knowledge of the village's existence. She said that it was fine, since she thought of a trade offer, explaining that she saw the paddy fields and would solve the labor force problem with her golems. in exchange for things such as shelter and land for a workshop. Angelina also tried to ask for the demand of living together with Mars, but he grimaced and said that he would agree to everything except the last one, causing the alchemist girl to laugh. Angelina felt satisfied that most of her demands were met, and she was happy that her workshop was even enhanced, believing that she could freely research golems and Mars's skill. Mars wondered how much the girl knew about his skill and took the time to explain how skill lending worked, along with telling her that if she couldn't repay her debt, she would lose the skill. She tilted her head and casually said that she was fine with giving away her Earth Golem skill, since in the end, she was the only one who could operate her golems best. The dark-haired male chuckled and said that the trade deal was done, as long as she didn't leave the village premises and provided support where needed. The next day, golems were starting to become the main source of labor for the village, even if it seemed a bit weird to the werewolf people. Asagi was impressed with the strength of the golems and how they were able to easily dig the waterways. And Mars asked the girl if she could save the water they were losing, and handle the water that soaked underground or evaporated. Everyone else was having fun. Mars wondered and wanted to make sure that Angelina was not being followed, to which Angelina reassured that she had taken that idea into consideration, since she heard from Elia that Ultra was looking for Mars, so she prolonged the journey to 2 months. The reason why was to make sure she wouldn't be followed, or even if she was, they would have already lost sight of her, especially since she had used a golem to get through the roads that became too steep for her legs. Unfortunately, regardless of whether she was followed, Ultra had still found the village, and looked down from a cliff that overlooked the werewolf village, an evil grin on his face as he hoped that Angelina was there. 3 weeks earlier at Duca Beak's residence, Ultra was talking with the butler, and tried to say that he had come there on official business, knowing that he wouldn't be dismissed since he still had the privilege of being S-rank. Ultra remembered the conditions of the butler's master and called in a witness, bringing in the mayor of Kanui, who was seemingly in shackles. The butler told the knight to keep things civilized, as he asked the old man about his name and position. Vincent hesitantly introduced himself and how he had been the mayor of Kanui for 10 years, and explained that a werewolf used to live there before going somewhere with travelers, but she had suddenly showed up again and purchased a large amount of goods. The old man gripped his hand and felt guilty for mentioning Mars's name without knowing he was being listened to, and wondered what would have happened otherwise. The butler learned that the goods bought were food, building materials, grains, and farming equipment, but that there had been weapons as well recently, and Ultra tried to say that all of that meant it was a sign of a werewolf rebellion. With a hum, the butler said that Vincent's name had come to his attention recently, since there was a case with his name on it about a group of soldiers from Duca Beak's elite unit being killed in the line of duty, after the incident of Ultra's party. Vincent tried to say that he was not being told any lies, since that was what he heard from someone in town, but the butler asked for that person's name, to which the old man felt defeated and reluctantly admitted that it was Mars. With that, Ultra tried to make the story out that Mars truly betrayed them, picked up a werewolf, was the person behind the purchasing of the goods, and was now planning out the rebellion. The long-haired knight told the butler to not worry, since Mars was supposedly just a small fry, and would be easily caught with the duke's strength, causing the butler to accept this and give Ultra the opportunity to talk with a Beak himself. Ultra smiled to himself and laughed on the inside, feeling confident and believing that he was going to take back everything that Mars had taken from him. At some point, it was expected for there to be problems when growing those rice fields, since not everything was going to be perfect. Mars, along with the others and the rest of the werewolf village, stared with disappointment, as one of the werewolf people told the dark-haired male that another paddy field had gone bad, meaning that this was not the first time this had happened. They had even split the paddy field into 7 just in case something like that would have happened again, just to try to prevent a total wipeout. But that plan of theirs had failed, and most of the rice had been ruined in the end anyway, causing only 2 parts of the field to be left. With a heavy heart, Mars told the werewolves to pick only the rice that they could examine and burn away the rest. One of them was shocked and tried to say that there was still some good stock left in the paddy fields, but Mars explained that if it was all caused by a disease, it might infect the other fields too, and as such, they need to stop it from spreading, as it would cause more unnecessary damage. And the werewolf boy walked away with a defeated expression to go do what he was told to. Everyone watched with sad expressions and their ears hung low, as the villagers had to witness their failed efforts be burned away just like that. Yue walked up to Mars and tried to reassure him that everything would be alright, to which he agreed. Shizuku needed some reassurance as well, as she sat near the ashes with a frown, before walking up to Mars and Yue to ask if they were going to get through this. Mars proceeding to put a comforting hand on the werewolf girl's shoulder and reassuring her that they were going to get through it. Shizuku slapped the sides of her face to get herself together, though she may have done it a bit too hard since her body started to slightly shake from the pain. Mars turned toward the alchemist girl and asked Angelina if she knew what would be the cause of all the infected paddy fields. To which Angelina took a closer look at one of the grains and immediately knew that the disease was caused by a mold-like substance, meaning that burning the affected crops was truly the only way to deal with it. Even though the waterways were divided, the risk of the mold infecting other paddy fields was not minimal. She said that it seemed as though there was a fungal plant growing near the water's surface, and weakening the rice plant's roots, meaning that they should pluck them out quickly if there were more of them near the paddy fields. Mars understood the situation now, and knew that it was a heavy loss for them, but it was fortunate that he knew the cause and countermeasure for the future, so he was going to try and protect the remaining 2 paddy fields. Unfortunately, one of the werewolf people suddenly charged into the area while panting heavily, trying to tell Mars and the others that there was trouble. He explained that there was an army headed their way from the grasslands in the east, with numbers of over 500, and the crest on their flag being the same one that the Burman group had, meaning that Duke Abik was coming. Mars hung his head low as darkness fell over it, while Asagi asked him what they were going to do, to which Mars finally spoke and told Shizuku to call Burman and the others back from the faraway Azure, while the rest would pick up any weapon they could. Yue and Asagi were told to prepare a temporary command post at Mars's house, as Mars announced that it was time to get ready for war. The large army walked into the area, and wondered if there was really a rebellion army in a place like they were in, and if it was appropriate to bring such a big army against the werewolves. But golems started to suddenly sprout from the ground, causing the soldiers to stare in shock. Another soldier told the others to not get flustered, as the commanding officer had already warned them about the possibility of golems, to which everyone started to prepare cannons. Angelina was sitting in a nearby tree while overlooking the battle, feeling a little impressed that the soldiers recovered quickly after all the confusion, and she knew that it was going to be hard to deal with them without killing them, but she was going to do her best as it was her responsibility. Meanwhile, in the town of Kanui, the rest of the army was still making their way to the werewolf village, but the citizens were still extremely confused as to what the Duke's army was doing there. Someone wondered if it was because of the girl they had been hearing about, to which another confirmed, but said that he heard that a demi-human called Shizuku was gathering allies to try and wipe out the humans who made her suffer. Suddenly, Rinono interrupted the gossip, and asked the men why they were standing there and chit-chatting, telling them that they should spend their time packing up their stuff. Within seconds, the men were running away, but Rinono was still surprised that the Duke's army was actually there, and couldn't really blame people's shock, since it was the first time this was happening. Rinono wondered what was going on with Mars and Shizuku, but her thoughts were cut off by one of the citizens shouting for people to look in a certain direction, as the Knights Order of the White Phoenix walked into the town. A man with a scar said that among the 7 Knights Orders, they were the fastest. But Rinono knew that they were also radical demi-human hunters, directly controlled by the capital, and were an order that enforced human supremacy. The man said that they had received a report about there being a demi-human rebellion in the town, and how it was clear that demi-humans lived in said town of Kanui, to which the citizens of Kanui started to talk amongst each other about how they were going to be saved. Suddenly, Garen walked up to the knight and tried to sweet-talk him, and say that there was no need to waste their precious time coming here. And Rinono tried to stop what Garen was doing, but the bald man stood his ground. While Garen himself didn't like demi-humans, he still didn't want any problems before he could make a profit. A darkness came over the knight's face as he said that those who collude with the demi-humans shall face punishment, and proceeded to slice Garen's arm off, causing Rinono to run up to the short man and tie his shoulder up to stop the bleeding. She asked the knight what his reasoning was for cutting a human, to which he explained that the behavioral norms of demi-humans were harmful to humanity, and how in the eyes of the law, humans and demi-humans were not equal, which was why the 36 knights were going to cleanse the town, in order to ensure that everyone does not trust demi-humans. The knight was about to take another slash at Rinono and Garen, until something broke his blade, confusing him, until everyone saw Shizuku protecting the two, while her skill was activated with mana activity at level 81,937. Garen stood up with a happy expression, asking the werewolf girl if she came there to save him, but Shizuku got upset from his perception and kicked him away, knocking him out as he smashed through a nearby wall. She told him to just lie there if he was too hurt to run away, and Rinono turned toward the other humans, yelling at them to run, since the knights were planning to kill them. They finally listened and started to run away, while the knight in front held a cold glare, and said that it was a crime to drive the people to escape. Rinono told Shizuku to run now, since they would kill her, but the werewolf girl knew all about how they were there to kill demi-humans, since she had heard all about them from Burman. Shizuku joked that maybe the knights really couldn't differentiate between humans and others if they tried to kill Rinono and the others, and Rinono tried to keep convincing Shizuku to run, until Shizuku said that it was all for the sake of their king.
The knight was given a spear, as he said that it was disappointing that she was just one small animal. But Shizuku said she wasn't alone. And many werewolf people started to flood the town and surround the knights, with everyone having weapons ready. The knights were not fazed or alarmed, and still had the confidence that they were more powerful than the werewolves, saying that they really needed to cleanse the people who treated demi-humans as equals. Shizuku shouted at them to try it, and said that she was fed up with humans like them, proceeding to power up her skill even more to level 367,895. In the distance, Mars could feel the power resonating within the girl, while he looked over the grassy fields with golems guarding him. He chuckled to himself as he figured that Shizuku was holding back from the start, and he knew that he could count on both Shizuku and Angelina to protect everything. Mars had heard the story about the Knight's Order who had killed a human who gave a slice of bread to a demi-human, thinking that it was only a rumor at first, but after what had happened, it might not be entirely wrong. The worst possible situation was the total annihilation of the werewolves, and since they couldn't live freely outside of the village getting overrun would mean total destruction for them. During the planning stage, he originally expected the Knight's Order to show up after the demi-humans grouped together, but then there was the possibility of them heading to Kanui first. Because of that idea, Mars was going to head for Kanui, but Shizuku, Yue, and Angelina all told Mars that there was no need for him to fight, and that he could leave Kanui and the village to the three of them. A good king must always consider the concerns of his subjects, and with that in mind, Mars was starting to realize how hard the job of being king was. He was talking out loud to himself and sensed someone, deciding that he wasn't going to say out loud that he sensed the man walking up to him, and pretending that he didn't notice while continuing to speak. Suddenly, the man attacked, and the golem shielded the force of the attack with its body, as Mars crossed his arms and said that it had been a long time. The dust clouds blowing away to reveal Ultra as expected. Ultra seemed ecstatic to have finally found Mars, as Mars himself noticed the expression, and said that it was a very fitting look for someone of a party that fell into the dirt after revealing its true colors. The long-haired knight told Mars to shut up, as he activated his Sword Saint skill, successfully delivering a small cut to Mars's face. Mars was impressed at how Ultra had gotten better than before and asked what he did, but the male just continued trying to attack Mars. The dark-haired man asked where the other three were, but Ultra said that there was no value in caring about them, explaining that Gordon had locked himself in his room, Tina was nowhere to be found, and Elia had also disappeared after her audience with a beak. He continued that he was not going to let Mars run again, and Mars asked why Ultra always targeted him, and what his purpose was for coming all the way there, to which Ultra shouted that it was to take everything back from him. Darkness overcame Mars's face, as he said that it was a relief that Ultra was still the same as back then. But Ultra didn't care for Mars's words and charged forward to slice another gash into the dark-haired male. Suddenly, Mars activated the Blessing of the Seraph, causing Ultra to turn around with confusion as he saw that Mars was fully healed, and threatening Ultra to try cutting off his head next. Ultra felt even more upset at the fact that Mars had somehow learned to heal, claiming that it was better than Tina's, and Mars asked if his words meant that he was giving up, to which Ultra charged forward again to cut off Mars's head like asked. He noticed that Mars was still alive, and tried once again to slash at the dark-haired male, but it was to no avail as Mars continued to heal himself. Mars started to realize the reason why Ultra could move better with Sword Saint even without Hawk's eyes. Starting to feel frustrated, Ultra pulled out something to shoot toward Mars, but Mars used his Cocytus skill to freeze the thing, along with freezing Ultra's leg in place. Mars noticed that it was an iron arrow with a poisoned tip, making Mars mention how Ultra never would have used something such as a crossbow in the past. Ultra tried to complain that Mars wouldn't know anything about his skills, but Mars insisted that he did, and that he was also the first one to notice the unique flaw of Sword Saint, saying that it surpassed the user's perception and got out of control due to being too fast. This was why he lent Hawk's eyes to Ultra to increase his dynamic vision. But now that he lost it, Ultra couldn't control his own body's speed and was afraid of crashing into a wall or the ground. Despite that, Ultra was fighting with more strength than before, making Mars conclude and ask if Ultra was using drugs to push himself to the limit. After staying silent for a moment, Ultra laughed and said that Mars had a good guess, pulling out a small pill while saying that it was effective despite the expenses. Ultra explained that it was really hard to catch up to Angelina, and said that he had to erase his pain and use Sword Saint to chase her, claiming that he had gotten stronger due to all of the hardship. He said that he had gone through so much compared to Mars and should supposedly be the one taking everything in the end. But Mars said Ultra should have made a different choice. It was true that Ultra was born with certain responsibilities that Mars couldn't understand, but Mars said that relying on drugs was no strategy. Ultra didn't care and snapped his leg out of the ice, charging forward to try and slice at Mars again. Mars activated an indestructible barrier on the golem, causing confusion in Ultra, as Mars asked if he should have called it Obsidian instead. Ultra was calling all of Mars's actions impossible, but Mars said that there were many things in the world that existed even though they thought it was impossible. Mars asked if Ultra noticed anything, and said that all of his skills he had used in the battle were his, saying that if Ultra hadn't tried to kill him, the skills would have been Ultra's instead. The long-haired knight tried to say that Mars was wrong, until he was cut off by Mars raising his hand, and Mars said that he was now going to take the very last thing left in Ultra's hands, telling him to try and stop him if he didn't want him to. Meanwhile, in the Kanui town center, Shizuku was bleeding from her cut up and injured arm, starting to have trouble while fighting against the knights. All of the werewolf people were also struggling since they were getting exhausted, and their weapons were starting to get ruined. The knights claimed that they fought in a humane manner, and said that having a noble will was what made the difference between humans and demi-humans. Shizuku said that the words were not very convincing when it was said by someone who tried killing another human, especially since it wasn't very noble for the spear to be laced with poison. The werewolf girl noticed her mana not transmitting to her skill, and wondered if it was because of the poison, to which the knight confirmed, explaining that the poison was a drug normally used as a painkiller that had a side effect of disrupting the flow of mana. He called it the perfect medicine against the physical enhancement and armor skills of the werewolves, causing Shizuku to become alarmed at how knowledgeable the knight was, as she asked how he knew about it, to which he admitted that he was the one who devised the tactics that once wiped out the werewolves' warriors. Shizuku said that it was poor of the knights to boast about such things to their enemies, but the man said that they did not cowardly attack behind the shadows like Shizuku's kind. His choice of words causing the girl to be offended as she shouted at him to not insult her ancestors. She realized what was happening and tried to hold back on her tongue and actions, since she couldn't get emotional, knowing that everyone would be in danger if she didn't calm down. She needed to find a way out of this. The werewolf girl felt as though she couldn't show her face again to Mars if she betrayed his trust, and the knight laughed and told the girl to show her honor and pride. He claimed that the knights and humans had never once told the werewolves to die or leave, and claimed that it was just to not bother others while they were trying to do good, making the story out to be that the werewolves started the war first. Shizuku was confused by the words that the knight said, since the story she learned was the other way around and that her ancestors fought and died with pride. She knew that she had to say something about it, but the words did not want to come out. The knight man came up to the girl as she threw another threat at him, making him stare with disappointment as he claimed that she didn't understand her situation. Suddenly, a vase was thrown at the knight by Rinono, upsetting the man as he wondered why the commoners felt so much emotion toward demi-humans, and claimed that the world would be better if people comprehended things properly. Shizuku tried to get the woman to stop, but Rinono slammed a foot down on a box and shouted that she was just like the knights once, admitting that she had seen Garen and Eldora bullying Shizuku but not doing anything about it since she didn't have the courage to put her own life on the line. But that was back then, and now she finally realized that she didn't know all the details. One thing she knew for sure, though, was that she didn't like the knights at all, and continued to throw more objects at the knight, but he called her pathetic and threw a dagger toward her aimed directly at her heart. She noticed and knew that she was not going to be fast enough to dodge it, thinking that she was dead, until Garen suddenly pushed her out of the way, while calling her an idiot. The knight scoffed as Garen told her that he paid his debt, and that they were even now, causing the woman to smile softly at his words. Shizuku saw the water on the ground and tried to put it on her arm, believing that she could possibly wash away the drug, to which the knight said that it was pointless, but there was something he didn't know. The werewolf girl's arm started to heal up, as she was surprised that the knight didn't know about what her skill did despite all his investigating, explaining that it got stronger and fiercer when she was fighting for someone else's sake. Shizuku stood up as her mana activity level was at 33,301,470, causing the knight to stare in disbelief before she charged forward and killed one of the knights to save a child who was seemingly still in the town. The knight thought that the endemic skills depended on the land, but Shizuku explained that something had awakened and proceeded to have her skill bite into his arm. She landed on the ground and ordered all of the werewolves to stand up and show the enemy their pride and strength, causing everyone to get up within seconds as the knights started to charge with the belief that they would win, as they had the advantage in numbers. However, the advantage in numbers was actually on Shizuku's side as well, as all of the citizens who ran away before had come back with weapons and the courage to help. Rinono knew that the knights thought it was foolish of them to collude with demi-humans, but she didn't care, and asked Shizuku if the humans could join the battle. to which the girl huffed and said they could do whatever they wanted. Rinono grabbed the dagger that was thrown earlier and pointed it at the knights, saying that she didn't like them and asked if everyone agreed, to which the entire crowd agreed to, as they all told the knights to not mess with Kanui while charging for battle.